If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment for more videos like this.
Late night workers and night owls, what were your creepiest, spookiest, and most paranormal encounters in the woods, outdoors, or haunted places?
Here is my personal story. When I was in my teens, I was driving home to the reservation. It was dark and near midnight. I had to remain vigilant along the roadside due to the frequent roaming of cows. While I was looking at the side of the road, I noticed an animal standing in the bushes. Upon closer inspection, I recognized it as a coyote, but it had no eyes, and its mouth was gaping open. I was stunned by what I had just seen, and then it occurred to me that it would be best to get home as soon as possible. A few miles down the road, I saw it again, but it was closer. I cursed out loud, "Shit." As I sped up, I turned my eyes to the road to not look at it. The third time, it was right on the road, next to the white lines. If I had driven past it, it would have been able to touch my truck. I went to the other side of the road and kept driving. I managed to get home and ran into my house. I was worried it might have followed me, but thankfully I never experienced anything else after the third. Why I avoid driving in the reservation at dark. I live in the White Mountains on the edge of the Mogo Lone Rim and the res. I hear a weird howling sometimes at night. Lots of forest creatures make weird noises, like owls, elk, foxes, and cougars. This isn't any of those. It's a very loud howling that I can't identify. It sounds so surreal and unusual. There are lots of stories of strange creatures in these woods. I am not saying it is or isn't one of those. But there is definitely something out there making strange noises. This happened well over a decade ago. I used to be a nurse aide in a locked dementia ward. One morning, as I prepared to do my end-of-shift bed checks, I noticed an old woman in our unit who was mildly senile but not in the advanced stages of dementia. As I approached her room, I heard her saying very clearly, "No, stop, you are hurting me. Stop doing that. I do not want to play with you." I thought maybe she was having some sort of dispute with the other lady who lived in her room, so I went to the rear of the room expecting to find her awake, but she was sound asleep in her bed. Before I could turn around and assess what had happened, I heard a little girl giggling. The man who was my boss at the time came in to help me care for the women in that room. He was very lighthearted in general and had worked in the facility for nearly 10 years. When we walked out of the room, I told him about what happened and what I had heard, and before I could even finish my sentence, he physically pulled me aside and, in a very grave tone, said, "We do not talk about the little girl." And that was it. I went tent camping with my dad a while back. My brother was sleeping, and I and my dad were having s'mores. We kept hearing branches cracking, like a big animal was out there, and rustling behind our tent. My dad was on guard, but he let me try and sleep in the tent. Sometime in the middle of the night he wakes me and my brother up and brings us out to the car. He says the noises won't stop and that they're getting closer. We spent the night in my dad's car. The next day we left, and I still don't know what was out there. My wife and I bought a used RV a few months ago, and for our first trip, we drove up to the Mogo Lone Rim to camp. We went pretty deep on a Forest Service road to find a spot with nobody around because the other side of the rim was so busy. We found a perfect little spot off the main road in a deeply wooded area. Before it got dark, we went for a walk. About 10 minutes from our camp, hidden back in the trees, we found this weird shack. It was clearly handmade out of logs, branches, and scrap metal. We were curious and looked inside. The inside was what freaked us out. There was a sleeping bag in the corner, and against one wall, stacked perfectly, were dozens and dozens of soup cans. Campbell's, Dinty Moore, stuff like that. I picked one up and checked the expiration date. It wasn't expired. None of them were. Someone was actively living here or at least using it as their pantry. We both got a terrible feeling, like we were trespassing in someone's home. We decided to just move. It felt wrong to stay so close to a person who was obviously hiding out. So we packed up the RV and drove about 2 miles further down the road to a different spot. Later that night, maybe around 9 or 10, we heard this noise coming from the direction where the shack was. It was almost like someone was banging a drum or hitting the ground with a rock really firmly, coming from the direction of our first campsite. It sounded deep, and my first thought was a plane in the sky or something down in Payson. But then we heard it again. This time it was different. It was higher pitched, but it was mixed with laughter. A wild, giggling shriek. I can't even describe it properly. It sounded like someone banging a drum while laughing hysterically in the distance. I scrambled outside to pack everything up. We threw everything inside and just got the hell out of there. We drove all the way back down the mountain to Phoenix that night. It's my father's and my time to shine. This happened in the late 90s in Prescott. Dad was building a cabin in a remote area of the mountains, surrounded by dense woods. Helping him lay the flooring was super fun, especially with all the exciting power tools, and during our downtime, we would play Diablo together. Father-daughter bonding. We went to town for groceries one night, and on the way back, we were slowly going uphill on a poorly paved, unlit road. Upon reaching a flat area just before his place, we see a smoky, woman? Apparition? She looked like the whole bottom part of her dress was made of roiling smoke. Like it had a mind of its own. If I could describe it, imagine the crazy worms from Princess Mononoke on the giant pigs, but it was smoke. Like a crazy storm of sorts. As she crossed the path/road, she turned and looked into our headlights with a look I can only describe as pure rage. She then crossed to the other side of the street into the dark woods. We quickly went back to the cabin, woke up my stepmom, and said we are going the duck back to Phoenix. He sold that cabin after it was done, and we never went back again. I've been in Apache sitgraves at night many times. Passing through, it's mostly normal as far as things I have seen. But I have heard some very creepy, loud noises that sound more like someone pressing keys on an old synth rather than something alive. My friend who I told about them says, maybe an elk. Sometimes a truck trails me outside of reserve, but I guess that is New Mexico. I camped once and experienced more weirdness than all my pass-throughs. Firstly, I saw what looked like a weird drone well before night. It wasn't over my campsite but just seemed to be watching something in the actual woods. Maybe all it was a drone. Once it was night, sometimes very briefly there would be weird lights in the far distance, but I don't think it was the sky but still in the mountains. Then, a very loud scream echoed around camp several times for, 5 minutes straight. A screech owl? A bobcat? Who knows? I was already in my car because I'm a nervous camper at the best of times. But that made it hard to go to sleep that night. My paranormal encounter in Thailand years ago. I am half Thai, from northern Thailand, Chiang Mai to be specific. This was in 2018 when I was still living in Thailand, likely during a school holiday too. My mother's from the mountain, Thaton or whatever they called it, some village that spread across rice fields and dirty waterfalls. It was dark out, 10 p.m. maybe? I was still wide awake and got housed in my mother's old room, closest to the gate. My grandma was next to me. I was still young at the time, not too young, just young in a way where you'd be scared to be alone. So I peeked out the blinds, letting the curtains hit my head as I glanced out. And believe it or not, I saw a girl staring right at me. She looked 9, I could only see her eyes and nose, just blankly staring. And then I ducked out, clutching my grandma like I had been sucker punched in the face. Hell, a dog even howled after. In Thailand, howls, specifically at night, are often associated with ghosts. The house we lived in was an elevated one-story building, a typical traditional styled house. The windows were high up too, so the thing I saw couldn't reach them, which checks out. We had high stone walls that surrounded and separated us from the neighbors and a large blue gate that was locked every night. So just how the hell did it appear? Maybe it was my neighbor's child? She was a young girl too, though she was 7 instead of 9. And I set out the next day and checked the wall that could connect the neighbors. There was no goddamn way a child could climb that. And then I asked the neighbor's mother. She said phew, her daughter, did not leave the house, she wouldn't allow her child to run rampant after 6. So what exactly did I witness? I lived in Kachina village while getting my education degree at now back in 2010. I used to take my dog and a really light setup down through Kelly Canyon for an easy walkable camping trip about once a month. In September 2011, I was set up for the night on the southwest ridge of the canyon. It was a really active night for wildlife. I saw or heard turkey, deer, raccoon, and a wide range of small critters. The campfire, noise, and my 100-pound Rottweiler mix kept most of the wildlife away, but they kept their choir running all night. Sometime after I went to sleep, the coyotes were howling like crazy real close to my side and woke me up. Suddenly, they all went totally silent at once. Temperature dropped suddenly, and the whole area lit up in a low-level yellow-orange light for about 10 seconds. I thought an ATV had stumbled on my tent in the night at first, but when I stepped out, the light just vanished. The temp started to climb, and the whole canyon was dead silent. For about a week after that, my pup remained silently glued to me. Still not sure what it was. I was on a night shift with 2 other carers, my colleagues. One of the clients, an old lady, was at the end of care. I had to sit with her in her room for the whole night shift. I was sitting in the room with her before she took her last breath. I saw her soul leave her body, and she passed on. The other caregivers were scared to come into the room and witness that she had indeed passed on. I had to check her pulse and call the doctor to certify her death. As we all stood in silence, I was next to her, and the other 2 colleagues were by the door, afraid to come in. Her buzzer started bleeding not in the bedroom but where she sat in the lounge area. It was 2 a.m., no one else was in the lounge. All the clients were asleep, the lights were off, but her buzzer was beeping in red. My colleagues were scared, they hadn't seen a death before, it was new to them. They started screaming in fear. I only said she was visiting her last place she sat at in the lounge. She is saying goodbye. My colleagues were terrified, they stood by the lounge door. I went to switch it off, and she was gone. I have experienced plenty more stories like those in care and nursing homes. Yeah, I had a weird experience in Big Sur. Woke up to the sound of something licking itself, right beside me but on the outside of my tent. I lightly hit the side of the tent to scare it off, it got up, and suddenly I saw the shadow of someone on 2 legs walk in front of my tent. Then, there was the sound of an animal crunching on dog food. I had thought it was my friend with her dogs, who had her tent, but when I called out, it was clear she'd been asleep. Unfortunately, she had fed her dogs outside her tent earlier in the day, and they left pieces around on the ground that she neglected to clean up. A few minutes later, I noticed all the walls of my tent illuminated as though from above a tree, with shadows of leaves dancing around on the walls/ceiling of my tent. We had been talking back and forth at this point, she was terrified of the animal right outside her tent. When I called out that there was a bright light on my tent, the light immediately responded and moved in closer to my tent such that the shadows from the tree disappeared. We were stalked all night by some animal, it would run off to explore the campground and come back again 10 minutes later, all through the night. We heard some man elsewhere in the campground yelling at one point/trying to be loud. I initially thought it was a wolf when I looked out, but there are apparently no wolves in the area. At 6 a.m. I ran down to the car to drive over to the bathroom and saw this animal running back into the darkness when I turned on the headlights. It had been following behind me as I ran to the car. Honestly, it was just a weird ducking night. It was strange that a 4-legged animal had been stalking us all night, yet I was certain I saw a person on 2 legs walk right in front of my tent. I still don't know what I saw that night by the woods, and it terrifies me. I want to share with you something deeply personal, an encounter that has haunted me for years. It happened about 6 to 7 years ago, in the mountain village where I grew up. About a kilometer outside the village, there's a narrow road leading to a small soccer field, built by our community. The field lies at the edge of a dense forest, filled with towering pines. That summer, I was around 16 years old. My friends and I spent countless nights sitting in a wooden shelter next to the field, beneath the endless sky, surrounded by the deep silence of the woods. Close to the road leading to the field, there's a sheep farm, a small, lonely place right by the roadside. One night, as we sat in the shelter, the quiet was shattered by a terrible sound. The sheep was screaming. Not just bleating, screaming, as if being slaughtered. The sound stretched on, filling the night air with a raw, primal terror. We froze. At first, we told ourselves it must be a wolf, maybe even a bear, predators we were all too familiar with in those mountains. But deep down, something felt wrong. The cruelty, the pain behind the sounds. It was different. More unnatural. After a while, we decided to head back to the village. We walked down the dark road, passing the silent farm. Just beyond it, to the left, there's a steep hill rising from the road, leading into the endless forest. A single tall street lamp stands there, casting a dim, sickly light onto the hill's edge. And that's when I saw it. At first, just a flicker of movement, then a shape, moving down the hill at an unnatural speed. It was on all fours, grayish-white in color, and it raced toward the road ahead of us, no more than 200 meters away. My heart dropped. I shouted to my friends, asking if they had seen it, but none of them had. They thought I was imagining things. We hurried to the spot where I had seen the thing descend. Nothing. There was no sound or movement. It had disappeared completely. I don't know what it was. But I know what it wasn't. It wasn't a man. It wasn't an animal. It was something else. For years, I wondered what I had seen. I tried to rationalize it. A wolf? No, the farm dogs would have gone crazy if a wolf had come that close. But they had been silent. Recently, I came across videos and stories about skinwalkers. Creatures from ancient legends, shapeshifters that lurk on the edges of human settlements. The description matches closely, too closely for comfort. I don't know if I truly saw a skinwalker that night. Maybe I never will. But even now, every summer when I return to my village, I walk that same road at night, sometimes alone, with only the sound of my own footsteps and the breathing silence of the forest around me. Growing up there, I learned not to fear the dark. But what I saw that night wasn't part of the darkness I knew. It was something foreign. Something that didn't belong, and though a part of me hopes to never see it again, another part desperately wants to know. To understand. Thank you for listening to my story. I would truly appreciate hearing your thoughts and what you think I might have encountered that night. I had a paranormal encounter while working for Google Earth. I got a temp job with Google driving one of those vehicles with a mounted 360 camera system. It was a fun job. I was tasked with recording highways, streets, and sometimes off-beaten paths in the middle of nowhere. I was assigned a company vehicle, and I worked as a one-man unit. They covered the cost of gas in the hotel, while I received a daily allowance for food. Pay was about $7,000 per month, before taxes. $1,099 employee with no benefits, though. My car was my office, and I would work 5 10-hour days weekly. I wouldn't have any human interaction for days, and it was a lonely job, but I enjoyed all the sightseeing adventures. The job was easy, but it required a lot of multitasking. You had a computer inside your car, had to navigate the road, and manipulated the camera system mounted on the roof. The job brought me to a small town somewhere north of Marysville, California. It was a quiet town and had a nice countryside vibe to it. I was finishing up my shift before my weekend, and I decided to take a shortcut by driving down the dirt road, which I thought connected to the highway. I really regretted doing that. It was 5 p.m. in the evening in the middle of July, so the sun was still out. Due to the heavy foliage and overgrown trees, the path I drove was really dark and creepy. The forest made for a scene out of a horror movie. I put my headlights on just so I had better vision. As I was making a sharp turn on this downhill slope, I observed my headlights reflecting on a yellow dead-end sign. Luckily there was plenty of room for me to do a U-turn safely. This part of the dirt road was the darkest part of the forest, with only small patches of sunlight penetrating the canopy from the overgrown trees above. Once my car was repositioned to exit the area, I looked in my rearview mirror, and I noticed someone standing behind the dead-end sign. It looked like a kid, maybe 13 years of age. He had one of those bowl-cut haircuts and wore dark-colored raggedy clothing. His face was pale, and he had that 1,000-yard stare. I could feel his gaze locked towards my direction. He had no facial expression, did not blink, and stood frozen in place. I felt I should check his welfare and ask if he was okay. I rolled down my window and reversed my car closer to where the kid was standing. Once I saw the brake lights reflect off the yellow dead-end sign, I parked my car. I was expecting for him to come to my driver's side window, but the kid never came. I looked into my rearview mirror, and he was gone. I didn't even hear any footsteps or the sound of twigs snapping. If the kid left, he must have been a trained ninja. The forest was eerily silent. The only sound that stood out was the engine from my car. I drove away slowly and egressed up the hill. As I approached within 100 yards of the main road, I saw a kid who looked similar walking about 50 yards ahead of me. It's possible it could have been someone else, but the dark-colored shirt, ragged jeans, and physical stature resembled the kid from earlier. His back was exposed to me. I couldn't make out his hairstyle or skin complexion from that distance. He walked away from the forest onto the main road and walked eastbound. I waited until he was out of sight before I exited the forest and drove the opposite direction. I was so frightened I didn't even bother to check the rearview mirror. I redlined the hell out of the car and booked it for dear life. Our cameras worked via the LiDAR system and automatically recorded 360 panoramic photographs while the car was in motion. My camera was recording at the time of the encounter, leading me to believe that one of the images likely included the kid. I reviewed the photos from where I made the U-turn at the dead-end sign. Nothing. There was no sign of a kid, no shadow, and not even a single silhouette of a person. The only photo captured was the yellow dead-end sign, the overgrown trees in the background, and dust particles from me driving on the dirt road. I reviewed the same recording from the second sighting of the kid upon our exit. Nothing. None of my recordings contained any evidence of capturing a person. I don't know if it was due to the lack of sleep, being dehydrated, or my eyes playing tricks with me. But I'm pretty sure I saw a ghost. Scary night about 12 years ago. I've always been sensitive to paranormal energy in one form or another. Usually it's feelings or pictures I get, but it depends on where I am. This event was the strongest and was witnessed by my boyfriend at the time, now my husband. He doesn't like talking about it, but I thought this would be an appropriate area to share. We were still dating about 12 years ago when this incident occurred. He had recently moved in with 3 good friends. They were renting an older house. A quick Google search reveals that the house was built in 1902, older than I thought. The house had 2 floors and an attic. One friend had the first floor, my husband and another guy had the second floor, which was the main floor with the game room / living room and kitchen. The last guy had the attic. We often went out as a group, me and my husband and his 3 friends and whatever girls they were seeing that week. This particular night I wasn't feeling up to it. The guys went out, my husband and I ate dinner at the house and went to his room to watch a movie. We fell asleep somewhere around 11 or 12. Around 2 we woke up to the sound of the guys coming home. Running up the stairs and heading into the game room and kitchen, laughing and talking super loud. We could see the hall light come on under his door. I was furious that they'd be so loud and inconsiderate. Like raging and angry. More so than the situation required, considering I didn't even live there. My husband calmed me down and told me if they didn't go to bed in a few minutes, he'd ask them to keep it down. A few minutes went by, and all the lights were still on, and we could still hear them talking, but quieter than they had been. I was calm at that point, but I had to pee, so I asked my husband to check that the coast was clear so I could run to the bathroom. He gets up and opens the door, and it's dark. All the lights were off. No one was home. We walked all around the house and knocked on the guys' doors, no one was there but us. Their cars weren't in the driveway. The next day it turned out one guy went home with a girl, the other guy crashed with a friend, and the third missed the train and ended up sleeping at the train station until the first train in the morning. Obviously we didn't sleep well that night. 2 months later we ended up moving in together, and now, 12 years later, neither of us has experienced anything like it again. It wasn't me, but an ex-coworker who came before me. Context: we worked in a power plant, but the terrain is massive, and it covers many acres. For that reason, we weren't at the generators but in a separate central area with its proper kitchen and dining building, a 7A-side football, soccer, field, and a control building. To get to the kitchen from the control building, you need to cross the field. Let's call him Leon. Leon was a very skilled electrician who occasionally worked as a handyman, taking on additional jobs. In this case, he was the assistant to the control room operator, which meant that during the night shift, he, the operator, and occasionally the boss were the only 3 people awake on the entire premises. For his break, he had to go to the kitchen to heat his food, but all the way there, crossing the football field, he felt uneasy from the very beginning. Once in the building, he said he felt a very cold and uncomfortable breeze behind him, as he could hear someone calling for his name, most importantly, not screaming, but almost as if they were in the same building. When he first called out to find out who was talking to him, he froze upon hearing his name a second time, this time sounding as if it was coming closer, because no one could be calling out for him at that time. He described feeling his skin crawl, goosebumps forming, and an overwhelming sense of unease, which prompted him to bolt back to the control room and share his experience with the operator. The operator insisted no one could have called out and he was imagining things, but he still refused to go back to the kitchen after that for the rest of the night, opting to rather eat cold food. After all, he didn't dare go to the kitchen on his own for the next week or 2. That experience happened long before I started working there. He has told the story consistently over the years, so my coworkers now believe it is real. Because it felt grounded, without over-the-top paranormal elements, we had no reason to doubt him. Even the operator at the time verified the events and said he also felt watched regularly. I work in a group home for teenage boys, and I've worked there for 3 years now. I don't strictly work the night shift, I work all different hours, but I do get scheduled for night shifts often. Throughout my years working here, I have heard other coworkers share their creepy experiences on night shifts, but until a week ago, I had never personally experienced anything like that myself. The boys there are usually quiet sleepers, but occasionally they talk in their sleep or linger in their rooms, which I'm used to. However, this is the first occasion on which I have experienced this, as I continually heard loud banging and knocking noises throughout the night. In one particular room, it sounded like there was knocking on the walls as well as on the window, even though all of the kids were either asleep or half asleep at that time. But it was bizarre because the banging was super loud even with all the kids asleep. I also found a door that got unlocked. I had wondered if maybe a kid had messed with it and found a way to open it, but this door is usually locked. And it was wide open. It was just a very creepy experience because usually when I work nights, everyone and everything is super quiet. I asked one of the residents if he was the source of the noise in the room, jokingly telling him to stop because it was giving me the creeps. But he was actually asleep. The banging sounds continued for about another hour before they finally stopped. I found it quite unsettling, to be honest. Has anyone else had similar experiences? Strange light in the forest. I'd like to start by saying that this story isn't mine but rather something that supposedly happened to a friend of mine whom I have since lost contact with. I had known her for several years when she told me this story, and it was the only strange/paranormal tale she had. So it's always had a ring of truth with me. Around 2004, she lived with her parents in a wooded area of Ontario, Canada. Their backyard had a handful of fruit trees, and a thick forest began where their backyard ended. One night, her father was climbing the stairs to go to bed when he happened to look out the window towards the fruit trees. A blue/white light caught his eye, meandering among their fruit trees. Not particularly bright, but not dim either, it supposedly drifted freely around 3 off the ground. Thinking it was a prowler with a flashlight, he readied himself for confrontation. But as he looked closer, he realized that this light wasn't coming from a flashlight. It was just a ball of light floating around the trees, as my friend described it. Her dad called for the family to come and see. They joined him at the window, bewildered at what this ball of light was. Dad decided to go get a closer look. But as soon as he opened the door, the light retreated to the thicker forest beyond their yard, weaving through fruit trees as it moved without a sound. Creeped out, my friend and her mom went back upstairs to go to bed, trying to put it out of their minds. Her dad stayed up a bit longer, staring out the window, mesmerized, watching as this light returned to their yard and just floated around. Eventually, it drifted back into the forest and disappeared. The following morning, my friend woke up to her father shouting in a panic. He had gone blind overnight. She and her mom rushed him to the hospital, where the doctor examined him. The doctor told them that he typically only sees this kind of retinal burn from people welding without a mask. It was determined that her father's blindness was thankfully temporary and should pass within a couple of days. I should add that her father was not a welder but rather worked in an office. As I said before, I have since lost contact with this friend. But as of our last conversation, the source of the light was never determined. My workplace was haunted. I used to work at this old plant that made door frames and doors when I was 18. It was probably built in the early 1900s and was falling apart in some places. I worked from 4 p.m. to 2 a.m. My job was to build the frames and scrap whatever wood I didn't need. I would usually keep the scrap in a bag until the end of the night and then go throw it in a large dumpster. My first few days, I felt unsettled because the dumpster was literally in the pitch black outside. This plant was in the middle of nowhere with no lights outside. I eventually got used to it. The bathroom was about a 5-minute walk from my workstation. One night I needed to use the restroom and made my way over there, and while I almost reached the bathroom, I heard a very high-pitched yell from behind me. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I looked behind me to see something white turning the corner where my work area is, and I ignored it, thinking it was the security guard. I use the bathroom and come out and go back to work. I ask my lead man if he heard a scream and if anyone came down here. He gives me a strange stare and says no. When it's time for break, he calls me over and tells me to sit down at the table with him. It was around 12 a.m. at this time. He tells me not to get scared, but that this place has a strange vibe about it. Many people claim to see and hear things there all the time. Apparently a little girl in the 1930s died in an accident there, and people claim to see her and a black dog. Nobody knows why the black dog is there. There is only one guy that says he saw the dog, but the dog disappeared when it turned into a corner. When I quit, I was so happy because that place gave me the creeps. This is an experience I keep having that I wanted to share and possibly get advice on. A few weeks ago my partner and I moved into a new luxury apartment with our 2 cats. We live in a major city near the beach. The apartment building was recently renovated, but the land has been used for various purposes for hundreds of years. We are on the 6th floor. The only thing I've found in the apartment that belonged to prior tenants was folic acid supplements in the cabinet. Since the very first night we lived here, I've been having a strange experience with an entity. I have had some odd stuff happen before, but nothing quite like this. The first night I was still awake at about 2 in the morning and got up to go to the bathroom. Clear as day, I heard a deep, male voice say, "There you are." At first I thought our home was being invaded, that's how human-like and clear the voice was. But then I saw a shadowy entity in the hallway. It was very tall, vaguely humanoid, and dark, sort of like a shadow but static. Why almost? Pixelated. It appeared to be walking on the ground. I retreated to the bedroom and got in bed. I saw the entity briefly enter the bedroom. Without opening the door, it just went through the wall, and then go back to the hallway. I thought I might have had a waking dream or something. I told my partner about it the next morning, but we both shrugged it off. What's weird is, we were working from home the next day, and I saw it again. Standing in the hallway, still appearing shadowy, but this time in broad daylight. One of my cats, who was next to me, sat up and looked directly at it, which is what made me turn around to see it. Another cat walked around it the same way it would walk around a human person. Around 2 to 3 a.m. every night, the entity walks the same pathway down the hallway, into the bedroom, and then back through the hallway. At midday, it just sits in the hallway for 15 minutes or so before disappearing again. It doesn't appear every day, but it does appear every night. Occasionally it speaks. It once asked, "Where are you going?" when I turned around to go back to bed. It will otherwise not interact with me. It has never approached me or left the hallway/bedroom entry. My partner can't see it. The cats continue to interact with it, look at it, meow at it, etc. I performed a cleanse with sage and then with holy water my parents gave me, and I've had no luck. It's not a scary entity, per se, but I do find it very unsettling, and I've been struggling to sleep or relax. Please let me know if you guys have any thoughts. I was working the night shift at the hospital. I have been doing night shifts to earn extra cash as a nighttime cleaner. Saturday night I looked up, and I saw a man at the information desk standing by the security guard. When I looked back around, the same man was at the nurse's station behind me. When nobody was there, the lights were out for bedtime, and nurses were doing rounds. I brushed it off as I'm starting to get silly. Often I see shadows or things at the corner of my eye, and as I go down to the basement, there is an eerie feeling down by the morgue, like somebody is watching me in the corner of the hall, lol, not just the cameras. The other night cleaner is a rather odd fellow. He leaves very detailed reports on eerie feelings and odd things he has seen. Sunday night I heard call bells going off to let somebody into the building. When security and I looked outside, nobody was there, but the call bells kept ringing on and off all night shift. I was about 19 years old and 90 days sober. My sponsor suggested that I go with him to this sober retreat up in Prescott for the weekend. Being new to sobriety and having nothing to do, I decided to go. I went with a few friends I made in rehab, my sponsor, and his friend. The retreat was somewhere to the south of Prescott at this Christian cottage camp. All I know about the place is that there were small cabins and a huge cross in one part of the area. As you go a bit further south, the road winds up the mountain. The next day my sponsor wanted to drive up the mountain, so we went with a few other people from the retreat we met. We followed the dirt road for a while until we reached a mountain. We drove until we reached a closed-off area that used to be a mine, turned around, and followed another dirt road up until we hit another closed-off mining entrance. We kept driving until we pretty much got to the top, where it flattened out, and it was a dirt road that was driving along a barbed wire fence. Juniper trees sparsely spaced out, barely any pine trees, full moon. It took almost 2 hours to get to that point. It was getting late. 2 hours to get to the point. It took 2 hours there, probably. It took 2 hours to get there. It was only going to take about an hour and a half to get there. It was half to get back, so we decided to turn around. My sponsor turned the Jeep around back, and we started to make our way back. Now a typical juniper tree is kind of like a huge bush in a way, and they are around 6 to 7 feet tall. As we were pulling up to this 6 and 7 foot tree, a huge black face peeked over. You can see the hair and the black eyes shining from the headlights. Then it ducked down. Without saying a word, I turned to my sponsor, and he turned to me, and I said, "I saw that shit." To this day I can still see whatever it was. Hotel ghost sightings. We work in a very spooky hotel at the moment that I had worked in for the previous owner over 30 years ago that we believe is haunted by her. My son and daughter also work there now, and my son, when he was night porter, saw her several times. The restaurant and bar have an entirely different layout than they did when she was alive, but my son said he was always aware of her standing and staring at him from behind the bar when he was mopping the floors. Occasionally there was a strong smell of cigarettes. She was a chain smoker, and there would be regular footsteps walking over the wooden floors and even tippy taps of her dogs following her. Once, we had 2 mediums visit who informed us that the previous owner was furious about the changes made to her home, particularly regarding her private lounge being converted into a small cinema. There are lots of things that go wrong regularly, and they break down, so we believe it's her curse. When I first got my dog, I was obsessed with taking her out on little hike journeys through the woods across the street from my house. She was a Husky/German Shepherd mix and entirely black, so as it grew darker, it became somewhat more difficult to see her. However, I did not mind. One night I decided to stay out and walk her a bit longer despite it being so dark I can't see anything in front of me. I have to use the flashlight on my phone just to avoid logs and thick, fallen branches. Everything is fine until she disappears from the circle of light, venturing beyond what is visible to me. I wasn't all that worried. Usually if I felt the need to call her back, I'd just clap my hands and she'd come running to my side, so I continued my walk. I could still hear her steps crunching in the distance, but when I got cold, I was immediately ready to go home. I don't do well with cold temperatures, so I start clapping my hands. She returns as usual, but as soon as I hook her leash on, there's another clapping somewhere off to my left. No one moved a single muscle. Neither of us did, but she had her attention dead set in one direction. My flashlight didn't light the space far enough for me to see, but I could tell she'd spotted the intruder. The clap came again, and this time her hackles raised, and I took several steps to leave, but she wouldn't move. My throat was dry, and my heart was beating so hard I could feel it thumping all the way to the tips of my toes. By the fourth tug I was practically choking her. I think I was on the verge of shitting myself, to be honest, so when she snapped her attention to me and bolted, I almost sobbed with relief. I don't think I could have lived with myself if I were forced to leave her there. I don't think I would have even had the heart to. We would have died together. As soon as another round of claps sounds, we sprint through the woods as if the ground is about to collapse beneath our feet. Longest run I've ever experienced in my life. My stamina was absolute shit back then, so I was winded after mere seconds, and my chest burned with an upcoming asthma attack. I made it home in record time, though, and when I burst through the door, my family looked at me as if I'd lost my ducking mind, but I couldn't breathe in enough air to talk. I'd been taken off of the asthma pump years ago due to my complete lack of problems. Doctors believed I was almost asthma-free, so it took 45 minutes for my breathing to even out enough to get out a few words. I didn't walk her in the woods at night anymore. As a matter of fact, I didn't walk her at all without one of my brothers with me. Next time I might actually shit myself, so I'd like to avoid a next time altogether. I remember when I was a teenager that my friend and I used to go ghost hunting together. We'd go to spooky places and scare ourselves mostly. But there was one time we found a one-lane dirt road that led into a forest right at nightfall. Probably a hunting spot. There were plenty in that area. She lived 20 miles outside the city. I was driving, but we mutually agreed to check it out. I turned down the path. It was pretty rough driving. Additionally, there was a noticeable lack of noise. It was like being in a vacuum. All you could hear were the overhanging branches scraping the car. About a mile or so in, simultaneously, we both felt overwhelmed, like we needed to get the hell out of there. It's hard to describe the feeling of danger and unwelcome we felt. If you have never felt it, I hope you never do. I threw it in reverse as fast as I could. You couldn't turn around because it was too narrow, and trees lined the dirt path. I backed out of there at record speed. We both felt we had escaped certain death. I haven't a clue what was in those woods. Whatever it was, it didn't want us there. I think if we had gone to the end of that road, we'd have found out. We went back during the day to look and never found the trail. Other people's stories in this channel conjured up mine. I used to work in an ER as a tech. One night I had to transport a baby to the pediatric unit. Her room was at the end of the hall. I get the baby and mom all settled in and get ready to leave. There are these double doors with the windows. As I leave, the doors start shaking. When I look, there is a lady motioning me to let her in. I tell her, 1 minute, I have to get the head nurse. You cannot just let anyone into those units. So I go to the charge nurse and tell her. The charge nurse and all the other nurses turn white. She tells me that no one can get it through that way anymore. I laugh and tell them, nice one. I go back to the ER and tell my charge nurse what happened. My charge nurse gets all alarmed and says that as part of the old hospital that has been sealed off, there is absolutely no way anyone can enter. I told them then they had a ghost that really wanted in the pediatric department. I work at a taco place in a small town. I think it's haunted. I've caught glimpses of things I had to do a double take on. I've been working there for 2 years. October will be my 3-year mark. The most frequent thing that occurs is black orbs flying around or a wisp of white fog. The fog appeared yesterday while I was sweeping the lobby. Anyway, what I want to explain a little bit are the pure white apparitions. See, about 3 months after starting my job, I was doing dishes, and I could also still listen to horror stories on my earbuds. I felt a soft tug on my shirt. Thinking I was somehow in trouble, I turned around quickly, feeling my heart racing and my face getting hot. I caught a glimpse of a childlike apparition shyly peeking from the corner. It wasn't see-through, it was like it was made out of blinding, white light. I try to stare directly at it, but it's gone. I blink and rub my eyes with my wet hands. I pushed it off as not getting enough sleep and hallucinating a little, but I couldn't explain the tugging of my shirt. Maybe my apron pulled on my shirt? Anyway, there was another apparition like the child, but an adult. I'll explain. I was in the break room on my 30, writing random things down that turned into a story over time. I hear my name being called again, thinking it's a manager. I look up to see the adult made of white light. It had an outline of the gold color. It had things coming from its back almost like wings, but the feathers were mangled. The only question I have is, what are the black orbs? Are there even black orbs? I think it's just me, but this was also a bit before the scratches started. I'm going to end this experience here, but I have countless others. I wanted to share this experience here because I doubt anyone would believe me if I told them in person. I say with absolutely zero doubt Appalachia is a paranormal hotspot. I grew up in northern GA and western NC. I have spent probably half my life in those woods. I have had many eerie encounters. Here are a couple that happened at night. 1. June 2013, I was camping with some friends near Max Patch Mountain in North Carolina. We met some friends on the Bald in the daytime and camped in a nearby valley/relief. We had a clear, open view of the night sky. It was calm and had many stars. We were joking around and drinking whiskey around midnight when we heard a whoosh whoosh whoosh, like a big bird or something flying close overhead. We look up and at each other, just wondering what that was. A minute later, this huge bird-looking thing zooms down from a tall tree nearby and swoops right over our fire, about 10 feet off the ground. It was jet black, and the feathers looked like they were really long, but I didn't really get a close look. We kind of hung around and tried to play it off for a bit, but ultimately we packed up camp and hiked back out around 1 a.m. We heard the whooshing again briefly as we hiked out and almost started running but played it cool. I have no idea what this was. It was big. Like car-sized. And it was quick. It absolutely felt like we were in its area, and it wanted us out. I also felt like this thing could kill all of us if it wanted to, like it was a core emotion or something. 2. Hiking solo around Bryson City, North Carolina, in probably August or September of 2014. The location was in the Nantahala Gorge area. Hiking a nearly overgrown trail from the nearby town to what was our staff housing. Very much a stoner/goat path through the forest. Evening, but not completely dark, probably like 8 p.m. I'm just walking along and decided I would sit down for a second and roll some smokes, as I had just gotten a fresh bag of loose tobacco. I sit on a log in a spot I know and just start doing my thing when I suddenly hear a shuffle like a foot right near me. I look over, and there is just a dude standing there maybe 5 feet away from me. Not looking at me but facing the same direction. I wonder how the hell this guy got so close to me without me hearing him. In a quiet forest, at night. Definitely eerie. I said something like howdy or how's it going, and he just looked at me and nodded his head. I started putting my things away to head out as I had the bad vibe, and when I looked back, he was gone. Just gone. Nowhere to be seen. He could not have gotten away from me that fast. With no sound. This one truly freaks me out to this day. 3. Last one, camping near Tellico Gap on the Ant with a friend. I get up to take a breather. Notice 2 eyes in the nearby brush looking at me, 2 big hazel/brown eyes. Get a bit freaked out but tell myself it is probably a lion, fox, or something like that. I yell at it the same as I would for a black bear, shoo. Get out. Go on. Etc. It doesn't move. I cast a quick glance at my friend, only to discover that its eyes have vanished. He grabs the bright flashlight from my bag, and we don't see anything. Again, I don't know how it could have gotten away so fast. I didn't feel real fear on this one, it was more like it was curiously watching us. I didn't feel threatened by it. However, I also experienced a strange vibe for the rest of the night. I do remember my grandparents telling me creepy stories about the area too, and I, as well as my friends, all grew up with a healthy respect for the woods. All places have the energy, too, not just Appalachia. I think there is just a ton of energy and life force in this area. Something ancient and alive warned us away in Cathedral Grove, British Columbia, Canada. I wanted to share something that happened last night and see if anyone else has had a strange experience at Cathedral Grove or has an idea as to what might have happened. My mom and I were driving home to the Comox Valley after a long day trip to Tofino, and we decided to stop at Cathedral Grove around midnight. We got out of the car and stood in the parking lot near the trees, not deep in the forest or on any trails, just close enough to feel the atmosphere. Even during the day, that forest feels ancient and alive, like the trees are watching. But at night? It was pitch black and eerily silent, and the energy shifted fast. It felt thick. Sacred. Otherworldly. While standing there, I heard a very distinct metal clanging sound coming from somewhere in the woods. A few seconds later, my mom heard a loud snap, as if someone had thrown a rock. We both instantly got the feeling that something was off. Not random. Not natural. It felt akin to a dire warning. We got in the car and left right away. Yes, I know that the rational explanation is that it was probably an animal. That's the sane, safe answer. But something about it just didn't feel like that. It felt deliberate, like a presence wanted us out of there. I've searched online but haven't found much about unusual experiences at Cathedral Grove. Has anyone else ever felt something strange there, day or night? Do you have any stories, folklore, or knowledge about forest spirits, guardians, or fey energy in the area? I'd love to hear your insights. That place feels like it holds more than just trees. I work overnight at an empty warehouse as a security guard. It's just me from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. when the workers start coming in. I'm required to do a few patrols a night, which are essentially just me taking a walk around the inside of the building, through the offices, and inside the warehouse to make sure everything is in order. One night I was walking through just like any other night when I heard a very clear knock on the inside of one of the offices in the building. I never open these doors, as I said, I just do a quick walkthrough. I don't check every room. The first thing that came to mind was someone either got stuck in there and couldn't get out, or maybe someone had snuck in, so I walked over and said, "Hello." Then another knock, 3 times right there in front of my face. Someone was knocking on the door from the other side. I prepared a fight as I slowly turned the knob and opened the door, only to see an empty room. I never ran through a patrol so fast in my life. Scary camping experience. Last weekend we were camping up in northern Maine, Baxter State Park, and had a weird experience. The night itself was eerie, with pouring rain and lots of creepy noises. The 3 people I was with and I have camped many times and are no strangers to noises, animals, and other sounds. Around 3 a.m. we were woken up by foxes screaming. Shortly after, my friends, in a separate tent asked if we saw that light, to which I replied, "No. I did not see any light." I didn't think much of it and tried to close my eyes. Moments later, I heard them scurry out of their tents and into their car. I went over to chat. They were terrified. They said a light flashed 5 or 6 times directly into the tent. Again, I, and my fiancée in the tent with me, saw absolutely nothing, and our eyes were open. Our tent was positioned above, in a lean-to, and behind theirs. Any light at that time of night, we would have seen. They both insisted that they saw the light flash from in front of their tent, which faced the back of the campground, where there were no roads or people for miles. We got in the car and drove around until sunrise. The next morning, we investigated. We went to the area where the light came from. No trails, no camp, nothing. We even looked at maps to check if there might have been a car in the distance. Nothing. Then we saw something concerning. At the back of the campsite, there was a small hill leading into the woods. There was a rut dug into the ground, looking fresh and looking as if someone dug it out with a boot. It was the size of a shoe, maybe bigger. With the rain and wind, if it was older than the previous night, it should have had leaves blown into or around it. Anyways, we were spooked. It was just odd. I've never had anything like this happen. Any ideas? Had a strange experience walking home through the woods one night. It was about a month ago on a Saturday. I got off my bus from work to buy some beer from a large superstore. Nothing out of the ordinary. There are 3 ways to walk home, 2 down main roads and the quickest being down an old wooded path that used to be a Victorian railroad track. I live in a rural area in England, so the track is surrounded by fields. Walking down there I heard a group of owls hooting away, so I thought it would be cool to record some audio since usually it's quiet down there. Walking further down, I saw the moon through the trees and noticed it had an eerie reddish tint to it, so naturally I brought up my phone to take a pic. But to do that, I had to switch my torch off, so there I was standing in darkness trying to get a clear picture of the moon when I heard something solid and heavy fall from a tree behind me. It sounded like it fell from the top and hit branches on the way down until landing with an audible heavy thud when hitting the ground. I'm actually a pretty skeptical bloke who doesn't scare easy, but I admit it startled me, and I walked straight home at a quick pace. It's a very old track that stretches for miles. Thankfully I only have to walk down a tiny stretch, and I have heard stories of people hanging themselves down there. Could it have been a ghost? A petrified owl? A peeping Tom dropping his camera from a tree? I have no idea. My first teaching assignment, from 2002 to 2007, was in a 2-story school built in 1928. Old brick building, rural South. The kitchen was built in a basement that was later sealed up with all the kitchen equipment inside. I'm not sure why this was done. The building was a long hall with 6 or 7 classrooms running down the length of it. The building was connected to a second building by a covered breezeway. The breezeway had a set of stairs that led back to the main floor. The building doors opened into the breezeway, so once closed, if they were locked, there was no way out. The breezeway had a door that opened into the staircase and could only be locked from inside the breezeway. Rumors of ghosts had run through the community for decades, and when you were in the building alone, you heard your fair share of odd noises that didn't really make sense, but could easily be chalked up to old building noise. No big deal. Except one winter evening, Probably around 2004 or 2005, I was working late-ish and was the last one at the school. The janitors locked up and told me to make sure the doors were closed and secured behind me. Teachers only had keys to their room. It was about 6 o'clock to 6:30 when I was leaving. The sun had been down about an hour. As I got ready to turn off the hall lights, I glanced down the hallway toward the breezeway. The door into the breezeway was bordered by 2 full-length windows. In the window furthest from the breezeway staircase, I see the silhouette of what I thought was a preteen or teenage boy, definitely too tall to be the 4th and 5th graders we had, looking at me. It was not my own reflection because I can remember plain as day that the security light in the ceiling of the breezeway was shining behind them. I start storming, getting my mean teacher face on, down the hallway toward the door to yell at the middle/high schooler for being on campus and up to no good. The silhouette ducks behind the door, but I don't see it cross the window next to the staircase. I go bursting through the door, ready to jump all over this kid. Into an absolutely empty breezeway with all the doors locked. Now there was no way the kid could get into the stairwell. That door was locked and wouldn't have been able to be opened. Chain link ran the height of the breezeway all the way from building to prevent jumping or falling accidents. There was absolutely no way for a person to exit that breezeway once they were locked in. Needless to say, once I realized there was no one out there and was 100% sure of what I saw, still am to this day, I got the hell out of there and never worked in that building after dark alone again. Arkansas Buffalo River NP Strange Noises. So I just found this community, which is pretty awesome because I thought I and my friend were the only people to have some weird experiences while outdoors. Anyhow, my buddy and I served together, and we like to plan camping/hunting trips ever since we got out of the Army. We decided to check out Buffalo River National Park a few years back when I first exited the service. This place is amazing, by the way. There are old abandoned mining towns and mining shafts, along with 10,000-year-old ancient cave shelters used by Native Americans. Definitely check this place out if you haven't been already. We decided to do a wintertime camping trip off a tributary that feeds into the Buffalo River. Maybe a 2-mile hike in, but many of the areas of this park are remote. We built a campsite on these stone cliff terraces overlooking the tributary and had a pretty ordinary experience, besides how cold it was, until our 4th night. It was snowing on and off, so we had a tarp over our fire. In hindsight, this was not such a great idea because we were definitely getting smoked out, but because of this my friend decided to go to bed early. I decided to stay up and keep the fire going as long as possible for coals in the morning. After about an hour of me tending the fire, out of nowhere, we heard a shrill woman's scream in the night, followed by a man's voice yelling, "Hey, hey, hey." We were positive we were the only ones out here. There weren't any trails nearby, as we dead reckoned to this camping spot, and since it was winter, the tributary was very low, so that negated the possibility of people recreating on the water. The time was also around 12 a.m. at night. My buddy asked if I heard that, and I said absolutely. We always camp with protection, both of us carry pistols, so we weren't that worried. But during and after what we heard, we didn't hear sounds of movement, no brush crashing, just the shrill woman-like scream and the man's voice yelling "hey" 3 times. We rationalized that maybe it was a mountain lion? We read that they can sound like a woman screaming. We also checked on Google and at the ranger station to see if anyone had reported a mountain lion incident in the area. Nothing was reported. Hell, I'm not even sure if there are mountain lions in Arkansas, but I wouldn't be that surprised if there were. Anyway, we ended up staying one more night after this without any further incidents. I wanted to share this experience with you. It was truly wild for both of us, and I still find it difficult to explain. We spent a ton of time outdoors, and this is the only time we've ever experienced anything like this. Late night visitor. Growing up, I had a neighbor who I spent as much time with as my family. He also had a son a few years younger than myself, and we were all friends. They lived across the road from us. Behind their house was a heavily wooded ridge with an overgrown road going partially up it. At the end of this road was an old mobile home trailer from the 60s or 70s. It was captured by my neighbor's father, who was a state trooper, during a drug raid and was used as a hunting cabin for many years. At the time of this story, it was in a horrible state of repair and by no means was probably safe to be in. My neighbor was utilizing it to store random stuff. So one night I was over at their house as usual, and I and my neighbor's son were starting to get bored. At this point it was around 2 a.m. We decided to take the walk up to the trailer and sit up there for a bit. So, we gathered a flashlight and a small lantern, then headed up. At first things were uneventful. There was a light misting of rain, and it was a little chilly, but nothing bad. We sat in the trailer amid stored items and the decay of the place with the lantern for about 20 minutes just hanging out and talking. We were discussing leaving when we heard footsteps outside. I have grown up in the woods, and the cadence or rhythm of steps people tend to make compared to animals is noticeable. These were human and heavy. Step. Pause. Step. Pause. We had heard nothing come up, nor had we seen anything on our way up. At this point it made its way to the door of the trailer and stopped just outside. We called and asked who was there, the usual stuff. Nothing. Literally. No steps, rustling, nothing. I at least had no inclination to be trapped there by anyone or anything, so I picked up a rather heavy metal rod that happened to be up there. We whispered a plan, and after a second I kicked the door open with enough force to slam it against the trailer and almost shut it again while my friend shone the light out. Nothing was there. Again, no sounds of running, nothing at all to see. We gathered our courage, hopped out, and looked around for a minute. Still nothing to see or hear, no footprints, nothing. We decided it was best at this point to take our asses back to his house, which is what we did. Still didn't see or hear anything on the way back. To this day I still can't say exactly what that was that night. The light along the trees. So, I recently shared a creepy encounter my stepdad faced when he was a kid and said he had other stories and experiences that involved the paranormal. I was asked to share those stories here, so here we go. Growing up, my stepdad moved around a bit when his dad was still in the Air Force, and eventually his dad got out and they settled down in a small town in South Dakota called Underwood. Now, Underwood today is still fairly small with nothing to do, but back in the late 80s mid-90s or so, there was even less to do. According to my stepdad, Underwood was primarily made up of houses and land, along with a few small shops and possibly a liquor store in the town. He said that unless you wanted to drive about an hour to reach Rapid City, the most enjoyable activities for kids at that time were drinking, driving around late at night, or parking far out in the countryside to drink and smoke. Hence, there wasn't much activity during those days. One night, when my stepdad was a teenager, he and a couple of his friends decided to go out to a reservoir somewhere on the outskirts of town. They parked on a dirt path with their car facing the pool of water. Beyond the water was a stretch of trees, and beyond the trees was a chain-link fence that enclosed the area. After the chain-link fence was another dirt road that led out. He said he remembered it being pretty warm out that night, with no clouds in the sky, and since town was miles away, the stars and moon were bright enough to light up the area just enough so they could make out their surroundings and see each other. So my stepdad and his friends are sitting outside the car, drinking and shooting the shit, when they notice something weird. There's a light. Now, the light is moving along the fence, sweeping back and forth, and at first the guys think it's a cop car coming along to see who was trespassing. But there are a few problems with that idea. 1. There's only one source of light, and 2. The light isn't being broken up. This means that the light should be outside the fence and fragmented as it passes by. Due to the presence of the fence and trees along it, the light should have vanished behind the trees and then re-emerged after passing them. But the light was solid, and it stayed solid the entire time it went by. So, my stepdad and his friends are trying to figure out what the hell that thing is, and then one of them points out that the light isn't even on or near the ground. It's floating maybe about waist high, but because there was a lake of water between them, it was difficult to tell how high up from the ground it was exactly. They thought maybe it could be a person with a flashlight, but the way the orb of light moved and how it looked was entirely different from that of someone holding a flashlight up. And, though they were far away from the light, they couldn't make out any shadows of a person holding it. My stepdad and his friends watched the light for a few more moments until it just disappeared without any warning. Feeling unsettled, they decide to leave and go somewhere else to drink. They obviously didn't tell anyone what they saw, since they were breaking quite a few laws that night, and they never went back there to drink again. To this day, my stepdad has no idea what it was. He's a pretty big skeptic, and regardless of all the crazy paranormal things that have happened to him, he has many more stories to tell. He doesn't believe in the paranormal and always tries to come up with plausible excuses for what it could be. However, he cannot quite explain this particular experience. What are your thoughts? So I'm not sure where else to put this. I'm afraid people will think I'm insane or telling a lie, but a few weeks ago in the very western part of WV, I heard knocking in the woods behind my house at about 10 p.m. The knocking came in a distinct pattern, 2 knocks every 3 to 5 seconds, and this repeated for the next 10 or so minutes. It sounded like someone was whacking 2 2x4s together, but there are no other houses back there, and there is absolutely no reason for anyone to be back there, especially at night, considering the woods are thick and have very rocky, uneven, and unstable terrain. I wish I had recorded it, but I was too scared and in disbelief of what I was hearing. Although I didn't see or hear anything else afterward, the experience was enough to lead me down the Bigfoot rabbit hole, transforming me from a non-believer into a semi-believer. Considering the vast unexplored wilderness in North America, I truly believe it's possible that Bigfoot, or something similar, could be hiding somewhere. I stumbled upon this community a few nights ago. Listening to all the backwoods encounters reminded me of one I and my family had when I was a child. I grew up a military brat. My dad was stationed at Hill Air Force Base in Utah, and we took advantage of all the outdoors had to offer. Most often, we frequented Farmington Canyon, which was gorgeous during the fall. I think it was about an hour's drive or so, and I still remember the dirt road we took was quite dangerous at times due to its position against rock walls on one side and the edge of a cliff or steep drop. So dangerous that vehicles often had to slow down and carefully go around oncoming traffic. There were moments when I could peer out my window and see nothing but tiny colorful trees far, far below. I remember this trip in particular because it was a real treat to go camping in a tent with my family and our 2 dogs. It was the 90s, but we were using an old 70s style metal frame tent we picked up at a garage sale. Since my father had so many back issues, we were often restricted to day trips, cabins, or hotels. So this was something I was super excited about. We arrived at the campsite in the late afternoon and chose a spot next to a creek. We set up our tent and settled in for the evening. The evening was relatively enjoyable and uneventful. The fire we built was now simmering ashes, and we decided to call it a night, doused the fire, and crawled into our sleeping bags. Later that night, I woke to one of our dogs growling. Earlier, we saw rabbits, and I figured that's why he was growling, just some critter moving around. I soon realized he was growling at the sound of what was clearly crunching footsteps on gravel. My heart stopped, my breathing froze, and every muscle in my body went rigid. Unsure of what I should do, I just lay there terrified. He seemed to move around, inspecting different areas of the camp, including our tent, and trying to get into our vehicle. The increased volume of my dog's growling must have alerted him, and he soon left the camp. Soon after, my father, who'd been awake the entire time as well, I'm guessing unsure of what to do, decided that, when the moment of potential danger had passed, we should wake my mom and siblings, who surprisingly slept through all of it, pack up our gear, and get out as fast as possible. We were, of course, talking all about it on the trip back. It was around 1 a.m., I still remember the time, and I don't think anyone slept much at all that night, even safely back in our own beds. Not much of a climax, I suppose, but it sure scared me to death at the time and is burned into my memory. Oddly enough, I remember seeing carloads of college students, I'm assuming based on the comments of my dad at the time, but I could be totally wrong, hauling up this dangerous canyon road in the middle of the night. Still no idea who that person was, though, if they were lost from one of the other campsites, a passerby looking for an opportunity, or someone who lives out in the woods preying on campers. True story of a ghost following my grandmother home when she was a teen. It was the late 1940s, and my grandmother was born and still living in Newark, New Jersey. If you are not familiar with NJ, Newark is a city that has lots of drugs, violence, crime, and poverty. My grandmother and her cousin were the best of friends. Since their parents could not afford to send them away for the summer in one of the elected summer programs they offered back then, they decided to pack her and my cousin up and let them stay at their aunt's house. My grandma and her cousin were thrilled. Their aunt was wealthy, lived in a beautiful suburb of Connecticut, and loved them so much that she ensured they had new activities planned nearly every day for their getaway. They arrive and unpack their belongings, eat dinner, and settle down for the night. My aunt gave them $3 and told them to walk to the shop up the road and get themselves a soda and candy. As they walk, they come across a graveyard. They walk through the graveyard, and my grandmother sees beautiful flowers on a nearby grave. She takes 3 stems of flowers, and they continue on, eventually reaching the store, getting their soda and candy, and walking back to their aunt's house. My grandmother took the flowers she picked off a grave and put them in a vase on her dresser. Her cousin and she shared a room that summer, and they went off to bed on their first night at their aunt's house. Around 3 a.m., my grandma suddenly wakes up from her sleep and sees a figure that is pale yellow, as tall as the ceiling, and has black holes for eyes and a squiggly mean line for a mouth. My grandma was so scared she couldn't scream or talk or even move, she froze in fear. The figure was standing in between their beds, and it began to slowly slide backwards towards the wall behind it. As it did this, it started raising its arms out to the side. Then it smacked the vase with the flowers off the dresser, and it smashed off the wall. My grandmother then said the ghost made the ugliest and scariest face she had ever seen, and it vanished through the wall. They both got up and ran to my aunt's room screaming at that point. My grandmother was so scared she forgot my aunt was even there with her. Not only was she present, but she also witnessed the entire incident, leaving them both paralyzed with fear at that moment. They packed their bags and went home the next morning. It turns out that very night, that would have been their second night had they stayed, the ceiling in the guest room my grandma and her cousin were staying in totally collapsed and the whole room was destroyed. They never went back to Connecticut ever again, and my grandma never touched another flower on a grave for the rest of her life. A little over a decade ago, my father passed away. I can't remember if it was that same night or the next, but I had this very disturbing dream. I was back at the house I grew up in. It seemed like there was a party going on because there were a lot of people there and loud noises. I didn't go outside to see, but you could hear all the people talking and music in the background. I'm sitting in the living room and just observing everything going on around me. My grandpa was sitting there as well, and he starts talking to me. I don't really remember what we were talking about, but that's when I see him. My father is standing right there looking at me. I was so filled with emotion I started crying uncontrollably. Then my father comes to hug me. It was like he was saying goodbye. However, it occurs to me that he doesn't want to let me go. I'm not crying anymore, and instead panic starts to set in. I'm trying to break the hug, but he's just holding on too tightly. In real life I start to suffocate and can't breathe. I somehow manage to wake up, and I'm gasping for air. It was a similar feeling to almost drowning. I'm freaked out and crying hysterically because I don't know what the hell happened to me. At the exact same moment, my wife and I hear our son crying hysterically in his room. I didn't tell her what happened to me, not yet. She goes to check in on him, and when she comes back, it gets even more terrifying. My son said he woke up because he had heard me crying, but something else caught his attention. There was a shadow figure standing in the hallway right by his door, staring right at him. He said it was my father. He said it scared him so much that he started crying because it just stood there watching him. I can't explain what my son and I experienced that night, but it was truly terrifying. Overnight shift. I work as a resident treatment worker in a psychiatric group home. I've been working in this field since the day after my 18th birthday. I'm now almost 21. My current set of clients are all men, ages 30 to 60. There are 5 of them in one house, with a 1-to-5 staff to client ratio, meaning it's just me with them when I'm working. All of my clients are diagnosed with schizophrenia. When I started, one of my former clients was telling me about a man he sees walking around in the dark. Because of my job, it's normal for my clients to say things like this, as they are often experiencing active hallucinations, delusions, and paranoia. I work every shift depending on staffing demands, but I prefer overnights, as that leaves me with more time in my day. I've been working in this specific house since June, and I've been on/off the overnight shift every couple of weeks. Every single night I see a ghost. At first, I thought it was my clients waking/wandering in the middle of the night. But I'd see it, and it would always be a quick pass, so I'd do room checks just to verify everyone is in bed. They always were. After the first couple times, I started to become very suspicious, as it wouldn't be unusual for a client to do something out of the ordinary, such as wandering the halls. I kept trying to catch what I was seeing, assuming it was a client. Let me interject. I'm not afraid of any of my clients. I've worked with over 100 people facing these challenges, and I've been attacked by many of them on several occasions, and it's something to be prepared for, not afraid of. I have extensive training in crisis to escalation, hand-to-hand combat, and hands-on restraint. I'm 6 feet 2 inches and 220 pounds. I'm also not afraid of ghosts. I've always been fascinated with the paranormal. The point is, I was not approaching this situation with fear. I have encountered quite a few genuinely terrifying situations within this field. Anyway, after my first week on the overnight and seeing glimpses of this figure passing by multiple times a night, I was fully convinced it was a ghost I was seeing and not a client, so I began to look forward to seeing it, as I like the paranormal. I eventually brought it up to the other overnight staff, and she said she saw it too but never really thought much of it. It was never a bother until tonight. I just got back on the overnight shift after a 2-month stretch on the day shift. That client who first told me of the ghost was discharged early in those 2 months. So it had been a while since I had heard of or even thought about it. I just finished my hourly rounds, and I was working on service documentation. It's after 3 a.m., and I've got my AirPods in, listening to music as I write. The light in the kitchen flashed, so I looked up. I catch a brief glimpse of a figure walking towards the living room from the kitchen. I put my documentation in the desk and leave the office, shutting and locking the office door behind me, as protocol dictates that meds, records, and service documentation are kept in that room. As I round the corner to the living room, the kitchen lights flash again, but I see nothing, so I go back to the office. As I'm unlocking the door, the house begins to shake. Like an earthquake shake. I live in Iowa. Earthquakes don't exist here. It scared me. Like a primal instinctive fear. I make my way into the office, and the service documentation I had just put in the desk is now all over the floor. Like someone threw the stack up in the air. Standing there puzzled, trying to make sense of what just happened, the house starts shaking again. When it stopped, I immediately did rounds to check on my guys. Everyone was in bed asleep. Dumbfounded, I go pick up all my papers. I called the sheriff's department to verify it wasn't an earthquake, as I'd have to notify management and follow natural disaster protocol. They definitely thought I was insane. Anyway, yeah, I can finally say a ghost scared the absolute hell out of me. I didn't know they could shake houses. Lights in the woods. I grew up 10 kilometers outside of a small village in mid-north Sweden. Close by a lake, I played and biked around in these woods all through my life. I always had a kind of creepy feeling, but I know these areas so well. One night 5 years ago, I and 2 friends walked out through the woods. It was pitch black outside, and we just used our phone lights to see the trails to go sit by the lake and smoke. On our way back, we see some flashing, waving lights in the corner of our eyes. Maybe 50 meters away. No sound at all. We don't hear any people, no footsteps or sticks being broken, and then it disappears. And I think I read somewhere online before about similar experiences. The thing is, where our house is, there are almost no neighbors. I have no idea who or what that was. Our house is located close to the lake, with almost a swamp close to it. There are many strange noises and unusual plants growing in the nearby natural area. Stuck in a graveyard in the middle of the night and being surrounded. This happened to me and a friend this past summer. We decided to go to a smaller graveyard way out of town, maybe 20 miles or so. He wanted to go to his uncle's gravestone and try to talk to him. We attempted to contact his uncle. We, of course, wouldn't trust any spirit talking to us, and we didn't. So we do what we wished and get ready to go. Start the truck and put it into drive. It doesn't go into drive and is not shifting anywhere out of park. Mind you, this is near 2 a.m. or so. We don't think much about it and go about trying to diagnose the issue with the truck without finding any. At this point, the spirits in the graveyard are mostly leaving us alone. We called our buddy, who was nearly 40 miles out from us, to pick us up. We both suddenly get an eerie feeling and almost can see all of these spirits in this graveyard start circling us. This is the first time I've really felt genuine fear about spirits. Their energy was radiating negativity and was feeling as if it was growing and growing. Our friend, thank the Lords, picked us up before 3 a.m. hit. I would not want to know what would have happened or what we would have seen if we had been left there for 15 minutes longer as the clock hit 3. We ended up getting the truck towed to a mechanic, who said the damage on the line going to the transmission was something he had not seen before. Not normal wear and tear or anything that should normally happen, and this truck was working completely fine just before. I hope this sends a message to some people wanting to mess around in graveyards at night. Please don't. There was something that was wanting us to stay longer until 3 a.m. hit. I'm not sure what they wanted, but I know for a fact it wasn't anything pleasant. Nightmares about a previous ghost encounter. So about a decade ago I came face to face with a ghost in the basement of my old friend's house. I was foolish enough to go down to the basement alone, in the dark, very fearful, with nothing but my phone light on. I had forgotten something in the corner, and as I was retrieving it, I could just sense something looking at me, and as I quickly turned around, there it was. It was a pale white and misty man looking at me. He was also startled and made a discernible gasp. He looked so real in the dark, and I honestly thought it was one of my friends. My friends were upstairs. He also seemed like he was glowing, but again it was so dark that I thought it was one of my pale friends trying to scare me. He looked so fearful yet curious of me. He was looking at me while I had my back turned, but for some reason I could sense it and was able to turn around quickly. Anyway, as I got closer, the figure dissipated under the stairs, and as I started to rationalize it, I slowly realized this was not my friend, and I ran upstairs quickly. I felt so sick to my stomach the rest of the night and never went down there alone anymore. This was over 10 years ago, but I still have nightmares about that house. I usually find myself there alone, with fear, knowing that that entity is right around the corner. It feels so real. Do you think this means anything? Why do I keep having nightmares about being back there? Why did that ghost present itself to me that night? None of my friends have seen it, only me. They confirmed the place is haunted too and also confirmed they were not in the basement that night. I just wonder if this all means something. I think my workplace is haunted? So I work as a cleaner in a high school in my town. The school was built somewhere around the 1960s, I believe, and has had a few upgrades. However, most buildings are original and unchanged. The area I am set to clean is a long corridor-like building. At one end is the hall/auditorium, then the drama room, and following that are 3 classrooms. My area is one of the old original buildings. At night it does get pretty creepy seeing as it's just a long corridor, and looking down dark creepy hallways is scary, but that's beside the point. Yesterday at around 7 p.m. I was in a fair rush to get everything done and needed to vacuum my 3 classrooms down the corridor. I dragged my vacuum from my storeroom located in the building next door to the corridor and began taking it to the furthest of the 3 classrooms so I could work my way backwards and lock up as I go. Being in a rush, I wasn't on edge or thinking of creepy things or getting in my head about anything, just wanting to get my work done. As I reached the doorway to the second classroom, an incredibly loud bang sounded from inside the room. It was the sound of someone taking 2 hands and slamming them against a window. It made me stop in my tracks, stand still, and just listen for anything else. Nothing else happened, so I brushed it off and walked inside. I noticed that the source of the noise was that one of the old windows had come unlatched and opened itself. Again, I brushed it off and didn't think much of it. I continued walking down the hallway, and as I reached the 3rd classroom and began setting up my vacuum, I heard another loud bang from behind me at the entrance to the corridor. This made me a little more concerned, as it couldn't be the window unlatching this time. I was now on edge and walked to the entrance of the corridor where I'd heard the noise, and I kid you not, another very loud bang came from the end of the hallway behind me. This cycle repeated around twice of me walking from one end to the other trying to source the noise and then hearing the banging coming from the opposite end to where I was. Mind you, the hallway is around 70 to 80 meters in length, so walking back and forth is painful. Now I believe in ghosts 100% and have had noises and happenings in this building before, but nothing quite like this. I decided to speak up and say, "Hello?" and also wondered if there were kids outside knocking on the windows being silly. I was standing in the middle classroom, and from next to me on one of the class windows, the banging sounded. I can't describe how loud it was. I've never genuinely yelped in fear and run out of a building before. Whatever it was, I feel it was playing with me. As I got more scared, the noises became more apparent and loud until I was on the brink of tears. There was no one outside to my knowledge, as I was checking out the windows as it was happening. I have work again tonight and am honestly dreading it. Is this a paranormal encounter? Please help me figure it out. I don't know much about it. About a month ago, my family gathered in our hometown for my cousin's wedding. The whole trip was going to last 6 to 7 days. By the 3rd day, every family member had arrived, and there wasn't enough room for everyone to sleep. 8 of us decided to spend that night and the following night at our maternal great-grandmother's house, 6 women and 2 men, one of them was a child, and the other was me. To reach the house, we had to pass a graveyard that lies about 50 to 60 meters from the house. The graveyard was established after the house had been built. The house stood there for 10 to 15 years before the graveyard appeared. The house itself has been well maintained over the years, it's livable, has a water connection, and is generally kept in good condition even though nobody lives there. It's about 1 kilometer from where the rest of the family was staying, so we decided to go and spend 2 nights there after the wedding and then return. On the first night we carried our backpacks and walked to the house. While passing the graveyard, my cousins were joking about ghost stories and cinematic ghost scenes. We laughed about it. We bought dinner and ate at the house, and the graveyard was still on everyone's mind. One cousin, who hadn't realized there was a graveyard so close, felt scared and considered going back to her parents' place. The house is 2 floors and has 4 bedrooms. I had been extremely tired after driving all day for the wedding arrangements, so I decided to sleep early to be ready for the next day's tasks. I made my bed on the 2nd floor and performed my Isha prayer. I am Muslim. While finishing the prayer, I heard something in my head say, "Leave, leave," but I ignored it and assumed it was my imagination. By 9:30 to 9:45 p.m. I went to bed and fell into a proper sleep around 10 p.m. At about 1:30 a.m. I woke up to a foul, raw, meaty smell in my room. My hands felt very cold, which felt strange, but I didn't investigate much and went back to sleep. Around 2:30 a.m. I woke again. This time the bad smell seemed to be right next to my bed. The coldness in my hands had gone. I got up and inspected the room. While I was checking, I heard one of my cousins scream and the sound of people running toward my room. When I opened the door, everyone was standing there. They reported what they had experienced. One cousin said she felt someone breathing beside her and heard breathing sounds. The child said he saw a person waving at him from a distance through a window. Another cousin said something tried to touch her, and she also felt breathing very close to her. At that moment I began to connect these experiences to the graveyard. I alerted other family members, and we all went around the house looking for any sign of intruders. I even went outside with a stick to check for human activity and searched every corner, but we found nothing. By then the foul smell had vanished, and there was no physical trace of anything unusual. Now I'm left wondering, was this a paranormal encounter, something to do with the graveyard, some connection to our great-grandmother, or simply an environmental phenomenon. I'd never smelled anything like that before. The coldness might have been weather-related, and the window's opening could have been caused by a gust of wind, but the child's report of someone waving and the feeling of being touched are harder to explain. What are your thoughts? I worked night shifts in an old warehouse. So 4 years ago I got hired to do night shifts as a security guy. It's in a very old building, dates back to 1917, but fairly well renovated. Except for some parts. I've worked here for 2 years. Part of the job is leaving the front desk and walking 2 big closing rounds to check for any dangers, like open windows, potential fire dangers, electronics that are still on at the sales desks, and the magazine rooms backstage, etc. The first time I got spooked quite heavily was because of the mannequins. When doing my first round, I walked past quite a lot of mannequins, and on the second floor there's a lot of designer clothing I like, so I remember how some of those mannequins were positioned. During my second round, I noticed that some of the mannequins were facing the opposite direction from how they had been positioned before. This was within my first month of working here. About 3 months later, while checking the stockrooms, the radio was still turned on the third floor. While walking towards it and checking the clothing hanging there, I saw a vague pale face with long black hair staring at me from between some of the clothing hanging there. I fully sprinted towards the doors and was scared shitless. It couldn't be a person since the clothes hanging there were fairly high up, and I saw no legs. At this point I was questioning my decision to work here. Called in sick for a few shifts and decided to try again one more time. Fast forward a few more months. While checking out the kitchen, I heard whispers coming from the freezer area. I was extremely scared, but I wanted to be completely sure of what I heard. So I took out my phone and started recording a voice memo and got closer to the freezer. After being there for not more than 5 seconds and realizing it got louder and I had actual proof on my phone, I ran downstairs and waited at the desk to finally be able to leave this place. I kept listening to the voice memo. I never realized something like this would actually happen to me. I'm a very down-to-earth guy and never believed in paranormal stuff, but this shook me to the core. After this last occurrence I stopped working there. I've never told anyone about this, and I really needed to get it off my chest. I'm convinced there are things out there that can't be explained. Did I meet a dark witch? I'm not quite sure if this is the right place to share this, but I just remembered an encounter that I had when I was a little child, and I thought about how, to this day, I can't really explain it. Back when I was about 7 years old, I was taking a walk through the woods with my parents. If I recall correctly, we came across a diner or restaurant of some sort. I can't really tell why, but I recall that I was walking ahead and just exploring the forest surrounding the restaurant a bit. All of a sudden, I realized that a few feet away, there was an elderly-looking woman standing close to a path that would lead deeper into the woods. She was wearing a black cloak with a hood on her head, holding a walking stick in one of her hands. I somehow felt drawn to her and was slowly approaching her. I would even go as far as to say that she was actually waving her hand at me and luring me in, so to speak. The woman was very tranquil and didn't speak too much. But she wanted to give me something out of a bag she was carrying with her. As soon as I reached out to her hand, my parents did catch up to me and were yelling at me to stay away. It felt like I was pulled out of a dream or trance-like state when I heard my mother's voice. I turned to my parents, turned back to the elderly woman who was smiling and now slowly making her way into the forest, and turned back to my parents again. For one last time, I was trying to catch a glimpse of the woman, but to my surprise, she was gone. It was as if she had completely vanished or had run into the woods at full speed. Of course, I was young and could be reading far too much into it. But did anyone experience something similar before? My mother mentioned dark witches and suggested that the woman might have been one, but I'm unsure if she was just trying to warn me not to talk to strangers in the forest. Anyway, what do you all think about this? The first time I was at a haunted place was an old cemetery in the town I grew up in. My friends and I snuck out of the house and met up at the cemetery. The part of the United States I live in doesn't have a super long history, like the East Coast or Europe, but in the area there used to be Native Americans, and early graves were there from just after the Civil War era, like the late 1870s. The gates around the cemetery were low at some points, so we just hopped over, and we ended up by a statue that was like an angel in mourning. The statue was approximately 10 feet tall, and its face was not visible, as it was made entirely of white marble. The thing about this statue was that it was said to be in a haunted cemetery and that strange things happened to it at night. Most of the stories were passed down from older teens. We picked that area and brought a couple of candles and a small flashlight for light. It was a bit windy, and even though our candle was in a glass jar, it kept blowing out. Some of our friends moved over to the newer mausoleum area and sat on the marble benches to have the candlelight. A couple of them had enough and ran back home. I opted to stay seated under the statue until just before dawn, as I knew my mom would get up and know I wasn't there. I had a little throwaway flashlight, as I would rather not attract any attention from any cars driving late at night, even though I doubted they could see it from the street, as the cemetery had slight hills. At just before 3 a.m. everyone left and went back home, but I opted to stay. I sat there under the statue all alone. In the distance I heard animals, which wasn't out of the question for the area. I was afraid of a coyote or mountain lion, but not enough to deter me. I had a plan to run to the mausoleum, which had a section with a gate that closed like a doorknob but didn't lock. Shortly before 5 a.m., my brain started playing tricks with me as I swore the statue moved its head and hands several times, and I jumped and turned on the flashlight. There was also a faint light that went slowly off and on, but it wasn't like headlights, almost like a candle being blown out. At first I thought it was my friend playing a trick on me. But the light never came closer or moved in a direction. Eventually I got up and ran home, but here is where I got the most unnerved. I ran through the cemetery and then had a sudden feeling like I was being chased. The part of the cemetery I was heading for was towards the newer section, as that would have led me to the street closer to my house. Suddenly, I changed direction and headed towards the nearest fence that provided street access. However, as I ran in that direction, I forgot that section had an older chain-link fence, so I turned back towards the east. Eventually, when I hopped over the wrought iron fence, I felt like something was going to pull me back in. I kept running back home, but I was afraid to look back. I can't explain what caused me to lose it at the very end, but I felt like I was going to throw up because my mouth was so dry and I was covered in sweat. I did stop when I reached the opening to my street, and there was a stop sign for the street. I grabbed it and started dry heaving. My mouth was so dry, and my heart was pounding in my throat. When I was sure I wouldn't make a sound, I went home and stripped off my clothes in the garage, as they were all dirty, and it would have been more natural if my parents saw me in my boxers than sweaty dirty jeans and sneakers. I went to the kitchen and drank what seemed like 10 glasses of water. I went to my room upstairs very quietly, and the next morning my mom asked if I had gotten up earlier that morning. She said she thought she heard crying. I just said I got up because I was thirsty and that I wasn't crying. She said, "Yeah, I know it wasn't you, but I thought you were watching TV upstairs." I never told my friends the end part of what happened, just that I waited until morning and went home. I didn't tell them about my freakout, the water, or my mom hearing someone crying. A paranormal event occurred in my bedroom when I was young. When I was younger, I would say about 7 to 9, I had a really strange paranormal experience that I fairly often think about, and I have only been able to find one other person that had a similar experience. One night after I had laid down to go to bed, I was still awake, and then all of a sudden everything around me started shaking/vibrating to an extreme extent. When I say everything, I also mean my bed and myself were shaking/vibrating. After approximately 4 seconds of this trembling, I directed my gaze ahead. I was lying on my left side, with my bedroom located within my living room. Thus, my view extended into the dining area and kitchen, and I observed a shadowy creature. He was completely two-dimensional and had the appearance of a typical demon apart from the fact he was short, I guess. He had short horns that stuck out from the side of his head that curved upwards, a round head, and I vaguely remember claws. While I see him, the shaking is still going on with the extremity it started with, and the figure starts walking towards me. I put walking in air quotes because it wasn't smooth, uninterrupted steps like a person would take. The best way I can describe it is glitch walking. It's like he would disappear and then appear a few steps closer. I was freaking out and crying and screaming, but the shaking didn't stop, and the figure didn't go away. He got right up to my face, like if I wiggled slightly closer to the edge of my bed, my nose would have touched him. Once he got that close, I screamed for my mom, and then the shaking stopped, and the figure vanished right before my eyes. Listening to this, people may think it was a dream, but I know for a fact it wasn't just because of how real it felt and that there was no transition from dreaming to waking up. It was all one seamless experience. Furthermore, immediately after the figure disappeared, I sprang up from my bed and sprinted to my mother's room. Has anyone had anything similar happen to them? I have been listening to stories here for quite some time, but I have never considered sharing my own experiences in this space. For some reference, I am 19 now, so this experience was 10 to 12 years ago. I worked night shifts in a care home. I worked for 3 years in a residential care home in the UK. A year of this was spent doing night shifts with one other colleague. Numerous things happened during these nights, but I'll just give you the scariest one. We were sitting in the lounge while all the residents were asleep, and I was just going out to the kitchen when the front door shook violently. It looked and sounded like someone had kicked it really hard from the outside. My colleague came over to the door with me, and we tried to recreate what had happened by pulling really hard on the handle. We just couldn't work it out. Then as we turned around, we heard footsteps like somebody was walking right in front of us. We literally bolted straight back in the lounge. I still have no logical explanation for what happened. Other things were coat hangers moving across the rail in a wardrobe, dragging sounds in a storeroom, laughing when no one was there, and a loud breath behind me in the office. Lights flickering and a radio turning on just before a lady passed away. And one colleague saw a man standing at the foot of a resident's bed when she was at the end of life. Her husband had not long since passed in the same care home. Another colleague prayed over the home, and I never noticed anything again. I'm a third shift cop in a city of about 9,000 people. Last summer around 4 a.m. we got 2 back-to-back 911 calls that were immediate hang-ups. Our system shows what house the calls came from on the map. It's not perfect, but it gets the correct house most of the time. Anyways, my partner and I get to this house about the same time. It's a nice house in a nice neighborhood. Pretty standard looking suburban house. All the lights are off, and there was no visible activity. For context, the overwhelming majority of 911 hang-ups are pocket dials / little kids playing with phones / not actual emergencies. In fact, the vast majority of 911 hang-ups are not actual emergencies. Like upwards of 95%, so my partner and I are speculating that somebody probably called 911 by accident while trying to turn off their phone alarm. It happens. We walk around the house to look for any signs of foul play. Our dispatcher called the number back but didn't get an answer. And we didn't have the number in-house, meaning we don't know who the phone number belongs to. I'm walking up to the front door, and I'm seconds away from ringing the doorbell. To reiterate, all the lights are off, and the residence is a nice house in a nice neighborhood. Floor-to-ceiling windows on the front of the house. 2 stories, probably a $400,000 house, if I had to guess. So I'm standing on the porch, right about to ring the doorbell, and I shine my flashlight through one of the large windows on the front of the house next to the front door, expecting to see an empty living room. But, less than 5 feet from where I'm standing, somebody sits on the floor of the living room. Just sitting there on the floor, in the dark. And this guy has this look of absolute bewilderment on his face when I shine my flashlight at him. And this guy looks rough. He appears unhealthily thin, with long, dirty hair, a scraggly beard, and tattered clothes. This dude does not look like he belongs in this house. I was so startled by his presence that it felt like my body temperature dropped 10 degrees. I called for my partner on the radio to come to the front of the house, as he was somewhere towards the rear. And what does this creepy motherducker do? Who is this dingy-looking motherducker sitting on the floor in the dark at 4 a.m.? He starts scooting away. Scooting, on his butt, away until he's out of view. My partner gets to the front of the house, and I'm like, dude, there was a ducking guy just sitting here. My partner asks, where did he go? He scooted away. Scooted? Yes, he moved away by scooting on his butt until he was out of sight. WTF? So now we walk to the back of the house, and here's this freaking guy, just sitting on a chair on the back porch. Just sitting there. I'm asking him questions like, what was that about? Why were you just sitting there in the dark? Do you live here? And this guy is just sitting there, completely silent, not responding to any questions, just sitting there looking down at the ground. Not that it matters, but his body odor was so bad I thought it was going to strip my eyebrows off my face. And he had a terrible hunch in his back. Just an all-around creepy motherducker. My partner and I are thinking this guy is probably a meth head who broke into this house and ended the homeowners as they tried to call 911. I detain the guy and check him for weapons, finding none. And he has no ID. My partner begins calling out from the back door of the house, hello, is anybody home? Hello? And nobody was responding. There were 2 cars parked in the driveway, which were registered to a male/female that lives there. Our dispatcher tried calling both their phone numbers with no answer. My partner and I decide that one of us needs to enter the house and check for victims, fully expecting to find 2 people slaughtered inside. My partner eventually walks inside and makes contact with the male and female that live there, sleeping peacefully, though they were quite startled to wake up to a police officer standing in their bedroom. Anyways, the creepy motherducker, he's their adult son who never moved out. He's got some mental health and drug issues, but he lives there and apparently does weird things occasionally. I like to show my coworkers the body cam video of me turning on my flashlight and the person just sitting there on the floor. It's a good jump scare. Owl and Mountain Man kept me and my mom up all night. Back in October of 1989, my mother and I went up to the western part of North Carolina for a week to see the leaves change color. We rented a cabin that was owned by the cousin of my brother's former high school band teacher, who had retired several years earlier. The band director was more or less keeping watch over the place. He lived down the street, but it wasn't until Friday afternoon that we saw him. The cabin was somewhat in the wilderness, but it was near a main road. The band director had to go away for the weekend and was letting us know. We had the number of his cousin in case we needed any help. This was on a Friday afternoon. Up until that time, the trip had been uneventful. Friday evening we went to a church dinner, which was down the road. When we came back home, it was already dark. My mom started thinking about how we were the only ones on this road and we didn't know where the nearest neighbor was, which was a little unsettling. The moon wasn't full, but there was a light to the moon. We had separate rooms in the cabin. The power went out in the cabin shortly after we came home from the church dinner. Then my mother heard what sounded like footsteps, and she saw what looked like an outline of a hat. There was a man walking around near the cabin. Then we saw this hat disappear in the woods. By this time, both of us are terrified that this man is going to come into the cabin and harm us. Both of us wondered if he had cut the power source. I decided to sleep in the bed that was in my mother's room. We tried to sleep and then were awakened by an owl howling. My mother could see the owl's eyes, which were looking into the window. The drape couldn't be closed the entire way. The owl didn't take its eyes off my mom the entire night. The owl also hooted all night. My mother tried to ignore the owl, but its presence really unnerved her. The eyes really unnerved me. Neither one of us could sleep, as every noise jarred us. It would be like, "What's that? And what noise is that?" Every once in a while, we would see an outline of the hat walking around the general area. Then it would go off into the woods. Both of us were freaked out at this point, but we weren't about to leave in the middle of the night. There was no phone in the cabin, and this was long before cell phones were in common usage. The power finally did come back on several hours later, or so it seemed. We were in the wee hours of the morning. Originally we were going to leave on Sunday but left as soon as the sun came up on Saturday. A couple of days later my mother got a call from the band director. Apparently the man we saw was a mountain man who was a handyman and had been trying to get the power back on for us. He was harmless, but neither the band director nor his cousin had told us that he lived out in the woods. We hadn't seen this guy until Friday night when the power went out. Had we known this, we wouldn't have left on Saturday. He had told the band director that we left a day early. We could laugh about being scared. It was a memorable night. Bingham's Light. In the very rural area I live in, there are quite a few ghost stories, tales, legends, and superstitions. One such ghost story is called the Bingham Light. The story goes that a train conductor fell from the train while waving his lantern to warn someone on the track the train was coming. So he supposedly fell from the train, and it cut off his head. And now you can see the light of his lantern at the place where the tracks used to be. It is a well-known story for my area. People would constantly go out to the area in search of the light. It was a popular hangout spot for high school students and adults to go out there, get drunk, and test their courage against the light. The National Guard even went out to the location with night vision goggles to try to solve the mystery of the light but came up empty. I had heard the story my whole life but never made it out there till I was an adult. The first time out there was scary, partly from the ghost story, but also because of some of the living beings who showed up on this particular night. So the area the light shows up in is at the end of a dirt road next to an open field surrounded by a swamp. We were excited to be there and had some amazing luck, because we saw the light floating at the end of the road as soon as we turned on the dirt road. We slowly drove toward it, and when we were maybe 100 yards away, it vanished, so we pulled up and got out of the car, and that's when we saw the light was now behind us, back toward the entrance to the road. There were 5 of us in the group, me, my best friend, his girlfriend, her brother, and the brother's girlfriend. The stories about the light say if you yell or shoot at the light, it will change colors. The brother starts yelling at the light, saying, "I have your head." The rest of us told him to stop. We don't believe that taunting the supernatural is a good idea. He ignored us and kept yelling, and the light actually went from a yellowish light to a deep red. It started moving toward us but then turned sharply left and disappeared into the swamp. It was a crazy experience, and our adrenaline was pumping because we were all terrified when it changed colors and started coming toward us. We all stood there comparing notes on what we had witnessed, and that's when we saw headlights on the other end of the road as a vehicle approached. We should have just gotten in the car and left, but we didn't. We were having a good time and didn't want it to end. Besides, we figured the new arrivals were just like us and just looking to have a good time and see the light. When they arrived, there were 2 guys in a beat-up pickup truck. They got out and said hi. We returned the greeting. They asked us if we had seen the light. We told them yeah and shared our story. They began to share their experiences, as they were regulars out here. They told us that they knew where the old tracks were in the swamp just beyond the field. One of them offered to walk us over and show us. We were excited and gladly accepted. It ended up with all of us walking over. One of them was in front of us, the other was in the back. I started to get a bad feeling. I don't know why they had done nothing wrong, but something was telling me this was not a good idea. We were about 50 yards from the tree line of the swamp when all of a sudden I saw the light to my left out of the corner of my eye. I stopped everyone and said, "There it goes." It vanished as fast as it had appeared, but as I looked in that direction, I noticed the guy who was leading us, who was slightly to my left, had a long knife hidden in his hand close to his leg. I would have never noticed it in the dark, especially since I was looking straight ahead, intent on our destination. Anyway, a shiver ran down my spine as I tried to figure out what to do. I just knew if we walked into that swamp, something bad was about to happen. I checked my watch and said, "Oh wow, it is later than I thought, and my wife is waiting on me." The guys tried to talk us into continuing, as it was really close and wouldn't take long. I just said I can't, I really have to get home. I tensed up waiting for them to do something as we turned and started walking back to the car. I stayed where I could keep an eye on both of them as we made our way back. We ended up getting in the car and driving off without incident. I told my friends what I had seen, and they freaked out too. They hadn't noticed it. We agreed we owed the light a debt of gratitude. I am not saying the light was trying to protect us, but I am sure thankful it showed up when it did. I still get a cold chill when I think about what could have happened. I used to work at a store on an island in the South Pacific. I'm American. There is a ghost, or whatever, there that used to block the path to the only door to leave from when I stayed late. I used to stay late often to use the internet because being in the middle of the Pacific, broadband was like $350 per month for dial-up speeds. The time was like 2010-ish. There was only one door that could be used to enter/leave, and only 2 people on the island had a key. Myself being one of them. To get to the door from the office, I'd have to go around a corner and walk between the office wall and a service counter. I was a smoker, so I'd take breaks from my internet sessions often when I stayed late. On many occasions I'd find empty boxes blocking my path, and I assumed employees left them there. I talked to the guy that ran the service counter about making sure the boxes were put in the dumpster before he left each night, but it continued to happen again and again. When I talked to him again and again, he insisted that he made sure the path was cleared before he left. We had 2 flags that were on poles about 3 long. The country's flag and a US flag, US-owned company, that we hung outside every day. We brought them in every night and put them behind the service counter. I went out to smoke 3 to 4 times, but the last time I went to smoke, the flags were laid across my path on top of the service counter and a shelf behind it, blocking my path. I was the only one who could hear someone sneak in, and only one other person had a key. I knew he was at the airport drinking with his friend before he went on a trip. We had a security guard stationed right outside the door from the time we opened until we closed. I asked him if anyone entered, and he vehemently denied it. I quit staying late at that point. Here's the unexpected twist. After work one night I went across the street to have a couple of drinks with a coworker at a resort before we went to our boss's, the only other person in the country that had a key, party for his daughter's 1-year birthday. These parties are considered the biggest day of celebration in this country due to the historically high mortality rate for babies. It's bigger than birthdays, funerals, and weddings. It's a big deal there. Before we left, I told my friend I needed to use the bathroom and asked him if he needed to use it too. He didn't need to use the bathroom, so I entered the store's pitch darkness and navigated through it using muscle memory, passing the service counter and entering the office to access the adjacent bathroom. While I was peeing, I heard a clang sound coming from the door area. Which confused me because nobody could possibly be in there. I assumed my friend had also decided to use the bathroom, so I tried the lock, which automatically locks when closed. This didn't make sense in relation to the sound I heard, but I couldn't think of another explanation. I finished and walked out through the dark the exact path I walked in. Then I ran into one of the bar stools we had for our customers in front of the service counter. It moved several feet from in front of the service counter, around a corner, and into a path I just walked through 1 minute before. Once I realized what happened, the sound I heard made perfect sense. The legs of the stool jostling across the floor. All the hairs in my body stood at attention, a sense of panic swept over me, and I ran the last couple of yards to the door. I asked the security guard and my friend if anyone entered, and they were as shocked as I was once I told them what happened. The only other person with a key was at his daughter's most important day party and would never in a million years leave it to play a prank on me, nor would he even know that I would decide to use the bathroom real quick. So basically, the ghost, or whatever, seemed to enjoy effing with me by blocking my path. We had a warehouse worker who refused to go upstairs in the warehouse alone because he saw a black shadow woman on several occasions. I'm assuming that's the same entity that messed with me. Several other employees reported experiencing minor issues as well. The history of the building wasn't very old, but the island had a violent history. The Japanese occupied the island for a short period during World War II, and they were not kind. There were numerous acts of self-assassination and murders committed by the locals during that period. I don't know if that has anything to do with the entity in our store, but it's the only explanation I can think of. Night shift at a haunted hotel. I was looking for a place to share these kinds of things. I have a lot of weird experiences in different places, however, it's been 8 months since I started working the night shift in a hotel. Nobody told me anything until I started asking because of weird experiences. My shift starts at 10 p.m. and ends at 8 a.m. I honestly love it because it gave me time to dedicate to my hobbies since I only need to answer the phone and give keys. It was rather sooner than later that I started to notice weird things. For example, it's really common to see the lights of the hallway of the second floor turning on and off during the night. Sometimes some doors will get open or close without anyone near them. At the end of the hallway of the first floor, sometimes you can see a shadow person at the end. You can also hear someone say your name in a low tone or hear people talking at late hours of the night. I am the only worker at night, and most of the people that come here come for work, so they get to bed really early. The most extreme experience was a day when a girl from the morning shift got here and we were talking in the kitchen about that day's schedule. Without any warning, every cooking pot and cutting board, dozens of them in different sizes, just flew around the kitchen. Most of my coworkers say that this wouldn't happen at night because they fear the ghost, but honestly, I am so used to these occurrences that I just clean up any mess it makes during the night. Actually, I haven't, but a friend says she did. About 10 years ago we went to one of the most notoriously haunted cemeteries in my state. It was the middle of the night, and it was a fair drive from where we were. This cemetery is from, the 1860s and is off the beaten track. Very few signs tell you how to get there, and in the dark it was extra difficult. The place is locked up at night to deter vandals and such, but you can still find ways in. Anyway, after we arrived, I decided against getting out of the car, and the girl wanted to stay as well. The other 2 friends hopped out and went for a walk around the cemetery. Now, this girl was already a bit sensitive to these kinds of things anyway, and I noticed she looked into the cemetery and quickly looked away and dove her attention into her phone. I asked her if she was okay, and she kept saying she was fine and said nothing else. After the others returned and said they didn't see anything, we left. A few nights later, when I saw this girl, I asked her what had happened that night. She said she saw a young girl sitting on the fence of the cemetery, swinging her legs back and forth, and that's why she didn't want to get out of the car. This girl definitely wasn't the type of person to make something like this up. Also, this particular cemetery is actually well known for its occupants and people resting there, as there used to be an old girls' reformatory nearby, so to have seen this specifically makes some sense. Possible paranormal experience working in a hospital. This is my first time sharing here. I have a possible paranormal experience, and I'd like to see what you guys think. I used to work midnights in a hospital, and one night I was working in the older part of the hospital, and it was a super slow night. There weren't too many patients on the floor, and I didn't have any yet. It was about midnight, and I still didn't have any patients yet, so I was sitting outside the block of my rooms looking at my computer. Out of the corner of my eye I saw an older woman sitting on the edge of the stretcher looking down at the floor and not moving. I saw her clear as day. She had short curly hair, was slightly overweight, and was wearing a white t-shirt with a colorful pattern on the front and pants. I thought, that's weird. How did I get a patient and not know? It's usually very noisy when they bring a new patient in. I took my eyes off of her and looked about my computer to see if anyone got assigned to that room, and no, they didn't. I asked my other coworkers if any new patients had been admitted, and no, there weren't. I turned fully to look at her, and she was gone. I was so creeped out I went and sat next to my coworkers all night, and nothing else happened. So what do you guys think? Could it have been a ghost? I wasn't overly tired, I know I wasn't imagining it. Ghost encounter on a hike. This story is from 2017, so it's a little old. My roommate and I had gotten into witchcraft and wanted to do a spell together. We don't hex people or do any kind of black magic or love spells, nothing that would impose our will on someone else. Basically, we don't put anything out into the universe that we wouldn't welcome back. We thought doing a spell on a hike would be beautiful and a lovely way to do a ritual. So we loaded up the dog and left. We started quite late in the day and went to Chautauqua Park in Boulder, Colorado. It's a fairly crowded place, and we ran into plenty of people on the way up. You basically follow a trail up the Flatirons and then follow it back down. Our dog, Stella, was a champ going up, so unafraid and excited. We made it to the top and found a semi-covered spot by rocks and trees. The ritual was simple, we were basically trying to get better mental health and financial assistance. Now that I've been practicing for a long time, I realize this whole thing was a bad idea, but at the time it seemed a nice way to do it. We made a crystal circle and burned the herbs we had pre-ground and prepared. So we meditate in the circle for a while and reaffirm our goals. Stella is getting antsy because it's dinner time and she has nowhere soft to lie while we do this. This is where we really screw up. We don't close the circle down or our own energy, we just put everything away and feed Stella and start heading down. It's then that I realized how late it was. The sun was setting as we started heading down. And while Stella was awesome going up, she was terrified going down. We would have to climb down parts and then pass her down to make it down some parts of the rocks. It was a mess, we were scraped up from the rocks and her claws, and I was just unsettled. I kept seeing weird white flashes in my peripherals, it looked like an angry face, and I kept seeing it as we got down the rocks and found the gravel path. It freaked me out, but I was trying to just focus on getting back to the car and not getting hurt. By the time we are off the rocks and on the gravel path, it is completely dark and pitch black under the trees. I pull my phone out as a flashlight so we can see the trail. We are all kind of panicked, we are both young women who have watched too much true crime, so we just walked in silence trying to focus on getting down the mountain as fast as possible. Then out of complete darkness, a man sort of just materialized ahead of us. I use that word on purpose because he seemed to slowly come into vision like when you turn on a really old TV. He looked youngish, like in his 20s, maybe, white, and with brown hair. I looked at his face briefly before looking away in fear. He had no flashlight to guide him. And his feet made no noise on the gravel. The energy radiating from this man felt angry and aggressive. I focused on his shoes because I was afraid to make eye contact with an angry person alone on a mountain. Even the dog ignores him, and she is a territorial cattle dog, so that was unusual. He walks past us, still making no noise, and doesn't look at us. He disappeared into the total darkness behind us. I thought about trying to get my knife out of my backpack, but I realized I wouldn't know if he turned around because he made no sound on the gravel like we did. Neither of us said anything, but we both started running. We were almost out when we ran into a group of 3 college students. They were laughing and talking and shuffling on the gravel. They all had their phones out as flashlights too. They said hello as we ran by, and we just kept running. We make it back to the car, and I asked my roommate if she saw him too. She said yes, but she wasn't sure if I had seen him, so she was afraid to ask while we were running. Neither of us can remember his face and are freaked out by his lack of noise and light. I mean, this guy was walking comfortably up a mountain in complete darkness. Neither of us really wants to say we saw a ghost. But with a poorly closed circle and 2 very sensitive people, it made sense. We got home at 10 p.m. and went to bed. We woke up, and it was like everything we had asked for in the spell was reversed. My roommate's wallet had been stolen out of her car, and $600 had been spent on her debit card. We were both depressed and exhausted and struggled getting out of bed. I still can't remember that person's face. But I'll never forget the way he walked up that trail without any light and without making a sound. I remember the waves of anger rolling off him as he passed by us. I had gotten off work late once when I was stationed in Miami. I decided to take my dogs on a short walk around my neighborhood. There was a guy who was walking up behind me kind of fast, so I crossed the street and slowed down so he would be walking in front of me on the other side. He crossed the street and kept coming towards me at a high speed. I crossed the street again so that he could walk by us, but he followed again, so I was sure. I waited until he was close enough that I could hear him breathing, and I pulled the 4M Watt stun gun out and pressed the button. It scared the shit out of my dogs, and the guy screamed, "What was that?" Like a 12-year-old girl. I calmly replied, "Come any closer and you're going to find out." I put my dogs in a sit-stay and turned to face him. He regarded me for a second and then turned and sprinted in the direction we came from. Night visitor. I don't really talk about this much. It has passed through my head a time or two, so here we go. This happened 40 years ago. I was 10 living with my mom, my bro had moved to Cali, so it was just mom and yours truly. It was late on a weekend night, likely Saturday, mom had already gone to bed, and I was in my room struggling to fall asleep. My room was dark, but I could still make out the objects there. My closet door, which was one of those sliding doors, was open tonight even though I usually keep it closed. I'm lying down in bed, kind of looking toward the closet door, and that's when I see it. At first I thought it was my hoodie, then it moved, floating out of the closet. I was terrified, not knowing what I was seeing. It was coming closer, it felt hard to breathe, and being a kid, I pulled the blankets over my head, hoping whatever it was, it would go away. I waited for what seemed like forever, and I finally got the courage to look out from under the sheets. Dude, that was a terrible idea. It was floating to me. It looked like a black cloaked figure. It wasn't very tall, but I couldn't see any feet or hands. It didn't have a face either. It came closer. Scared out of my mind, I closed my eyes, praying for it to go away. Opening my eyes, I see it right there by my bed, looking at me, sort of, with no face. I stopped trembling in fear, and then it bent toward my face, staring at me. Next thing I know is I hear a squealing sound, and, yeah, it was your narrator screaming my you-know-what off. This figure backs up toward the closet and vanishes. I'm screaming bloody murder for my mom. She comes and checks on me. I frantically tell her what happened, and she doesn't believe me. I mean, who would, right? I don't sleep that night. The next day I get up and have breakfast and go hang out and play with my friends, forgetting about the previous night's occurrence. It gets late, and the streetlights come on, so I haul ass home. Have dinner with Mom, and a few hours later we get ready for bed. I say goodnight and go to my room. It is then suddenly that it all comes roaring back, the unknown floaty thing, and it makes me uneasy. I try and push it out of mind, figuring to maybe watch some TV before bed. So I watch until I get sleepy and give it up and go to sleep. While I'm lying there, I notice that the closet is open. Oh crap. I try to blow it off and not think anything about it. That's when it happens. The visitor returns, floating over to me just like before. I am so scared, but it's then that I do something unexpected. I pull out a toy machine gun from the floor next to my bed, you know, the kind that makes a ratty-tat-tat sound when you pull the trigger. I draw down in this entity and open fire. It pauses in the middle of the room. I'm still looking at me, it backs up and disappears, kind of like a fade-out type situation. Whatever it was, it didn't come back as far as I know. I still don't know what it was or what it wanted. It seems that I will not find out. I just wanted to share my story with you. So there it is. During my first 2 years as a deputy sheriff, I worked in the Adult Detention Center, jail. The ADC in question is a large facility that houses over 1,000 inmates in a very heavily populated Mid-Atlantic county. The ADC has an in-house medical facility generally for inmates with chronic issues, for those who are detoxing, or for those who have something contagious. It could be a busy place to work, as someone housed in medical would end up going to the hospital for one reason or another. The deputy's post saw a lot of traffic, relative to other posts in the jail, as it had a refrigerator that other deputies would use and was also the repository for keys used by floating deputies. One inmate was a long-term resident, months, of the medical post, which was unusual. Inmate X was a fat, jolly-looking guy who was already sentenced and awaiting space in a state prison that could handle his medical needs. Inmate X was terminally ill, and his crimes were so heinous that his request for compassionate release was denied. Inmate X really laid it on thick, being folksy and trying to befriend the nurses and whichever deputy was working. The nurses and my fellow deputies were professional with him, but he wasn't someone with whom we engaged in banter. Inmate X finally goes to prison, and life goes on. Several months later, I get assigned to spend the second half of one shift in the medical area. We had a very late rotation, so I didn't get on post until nearly 2 a.m. After checking up on everyone, I went out to where the nurse's office is to get some coffee. The nurse on duty was one I was friendly with. She says to me, "Did they tell you in your roll call that inmate X finally passed away?" We were not told. Generally, the average deputy isn't keeping tabs on inmates once they go off to state prison. I returned to my post and entered the small secure room where I supervise the inmates receiving medical care. I sit down, and the room suddenly gets freezing cold. My hair stood up on my neck and arms, like there's an electric charge in the air. Behind me, one of the 2 sets of keys for the floating deputies is on a hook on the cinder block wall. There were a bunch of large, heavy jail keys on this key set. The keys started swinging around on their own and made a bunch of noise. My instincts told me to leave, but, you can't. Relief was still a few hours away. The feeling in the room turned back to normal within a couple of minutes, and the keys stopped swinging on their own. By far, the spookiest experience I had working there. Went on a hike on a foggy night. There was a really tall person also out there. I was off trail, and they had gotten lost and were just walking aimlessly. My heart was racing until I heard them sigh and say something like, "Duck, how did I get myself into this mess?" Up until then, I swore it was Slender Man, because I could hardly see them. I asked if they were okay and scared them even more than I was scared. They told me they were lost. I had a GPS on me and asked them to show me where they were going. I walked them back toward their house. While we were walking, He asked me what I was doing out in the fog, and I just explained that I liked the eeriness of hiking in the fog. I asked him what he was doing out there, and he said he was walking from the complete other side of the mountain and decided to cut off a trail as a shortcut. He was off trail when the fog rolled in, and he got turned around. When we got to his street, it wasn't as foggy, so I said that I didn't want to seem creepy and that we could part ways. He insisted that he was enjoying my company and offered me a cocoa, or coffee, when we got to his house. I was armed, so I said, "Duck it." We get to his house, and he lives in one of the biggest mansions on the mountain. I sit at his kitchen island and chat with him for a few. He said he wanted to give me something for my trouble, as it was over an hour's hike, and it'd take me 2 hours to hike to my house. He proceeds to the back of the house and leaves me in the kitchen for a few as I sip my coffee. As he came back, I had my hand discreetly on my pistol, just in case he was trying some funny business. He thanks me again and hands me $1,000 in $100 bills, just all nonchalant. I said it was too much, but he insisted that it was nothing. So, I reluctantly accepted. He offered me a ride home, which I declined. As I do thoroughly enjoy hiking that mountain in the fog, I've been hiking it for decades and know every square foot. I finished my coffee, and we bade each other farewell. On my way home, I walked by one of the only creeks on that side of the mountain. Of course, it just so happened that there was a pack of about 8 to 10 coyotes getting a drink. I pissed them off by startling them. I had to shoot at the ground a couple of times. They left me alone rather quickly. The strange thing is, those coyotes scared me more than the tall man lost in the fog. I hid all night in the Appalachians after hearing a scream and footsteps. What happened to me a few weeks ago on a solo hiking trip has been stuck in my head ever since. I've mentioned it to a couple of people, and every single one of them brushed it off. They all said it was probably nothing. But I know what I heard and what I saw, and it was something. No part of it felt normal. I'm 28, male, and live in North Carolina. I've been hiking and backpacking solo for years. I work a pretty normal 9-to-5 desk job doing graphic design, and I use the weekends to get out in the woods and reset. I've done this section of the Appalachian Trail before. It runs through Southwest Virginia, remote, quiet, and with barely any foot traffic. I've never had a reason to feel unsafe out there. The hike itself was normal. I started early, did about 12 miles, and didn't see a single person the whole day. Around 6 p.m. I found a good spot off trail and set up camp. Nothing fancy. I set up my hammock, tarp, and bear bag and sorted my gear. The weather was perfect. I turned in a little after dark. Around 1:30 a.m. I woke up needing to pee. I grabbed my headlamp, slipped on my boots, and walked about 15 or 20 feet behind a tree just out of sight from camp. My phone was in my backpack. I didn't bother grabbing it. I didn't think I'd be gone long. That's when I heard it. Somewhere deep in the woods, not close but not far enough, I heard a scream. A woman's scream. No words. Just a long, loud, terrified scream that echoed through the trees. And I'm telling you, it was the scariest ducking thing I've ever heard in my life. It didn't sound like a movie scream. It sounded raw and real, like someone who truly thought they were about to die. It cracked at the end, like her voice was breaking. Then silence. Just complete, heavy silence. I froze. About a minute later, I started hearing footsteps. Far off, but steady. Not rushing or running. Just slow, heavy steps through the forest. No flashlight. No voice. Just walking. It wasn't coming directly toward me, but it was close enough that I didn't feel safe standing up. I dropped low behind the tree. There were some logs and dry leaves at the base, and I laid down flat next to them. I didn't move. I didn't make a sound. And I stayed there. Listening. After a couple of minutes, I saw something in the distance. Through the trees, maybe 75 to 100 yards out, I spotted a faint orange glow moving slowly through the woods. At first, I thought it was someone with a lantern. But it got brighter, and I realized it was a large torch. Like an actual open flame being carried by someone. And they weren't alone. There were 2 or 3 figures walking behind whoever was carrying the torch. I couldn't make out much from that distance, but what I did see will stay with me forever. The person holding the torch had something dark smeared all over their face. Like black face paint or mud. It looked as if it covered everything but their eyes. They weren't in any sort of uniform or hunting gear either. Just baggy clothing and that torch, walking slowly through the woods in the middle of the night. They weren't looking for anything. They were just moving. Calm. Deliberate. I didn't move an inch. I was terrified they'd hear my breathing. My phone was still in my bag at camp. No way to call anyone. No light. Nothing. All I could do was lie there and pray they didn't come closer. They eventually moved out of sight, but I didn't move. I stayed there. All night. I never went back to my hammock. I didn't sleep. I didn't even stand up until the sun was fully out. When it was bright enough to see clearly, I made my way back to camp, grabbed my gear, and hiked 15 miles straight back to my car. I didn't stop to eat or drink. I just wanted out. Nothing at camp was disturbed. No tracks. No signs of anyone passing through. But I know what I saw. And I can't stop asking myself. Who were they? What did I hear? What the hell were they doing that deep in the woods at 2 a.m. with torches and face paint? Has anyone else ever seen anything like this while hiking or camping? I genuinely don't know what I escaped from that night. I am encountering an unknown creature at night. Please help me find out what they could be. I've had these encounters ever since I was a little kid. The farthest back I can remember is when I was 6 years old. I'm 20 now, and I still encounter them. I'm talking about waking up in the middle of the night and feeling the weight and warmth of something on my bed or on me. I'm not paralyzed, I can move freely, and I am awake when it happens. I either feel them at the corner of my bed, on my legs, or standing next to me. On multiple occasions I have reached out my arm and touched them. I could touch them and feel them, like they had a physical body, but when I turned the flashlight on my phone on so I could see what it was, it disappeared. They were warm to the touch. I used to be freaked out about them, but now, if anything, they make me feel safer and happier for some reason, and I always sleep better after I touch them. They don't seem to harm me, at least I don't notice. I do often wake up with scratch marks all over my body, but I think I do that to myself in my sleep. However, I sometimes get bite marks in areas that I wouldn't be able to reach. I don't own any pets. These usually don't hurt, although they often have dried blood around them. I never felt like they were a problem. This happened in our old house, our current home, and when I was sleeping at my sister's place. They seem to follow me rather than the location. I want help with what kind of creatures these could be. If they are harmful or not. So far over the years I haven't noticed them directly harming me. I have been struggling with depression ever since I was 8. However, I am uncertain if these issues are related. If you can help me identify what these creatures could be, I would greatly appreciate it. If you need any more info, feel free to comment. Thank you in advance. I live in a small town in America. You must understand that before I get into this, I've never experienced something like this, so it kind of scares me. I, female 16, work at a pizza place with my best friend Jackie, female 16. For a brief while my best friend was visiting family, I would close alone or just be the last one there, as my other coworkers would leave early. During this time when I was alone, I always felt some sort of eerie presence and would hear a lot of very weird noises. Figuring it was probably just an old building, I took no notice of it and started playing music on my speaker to take my brain away from the feelings I always got while closing alone. I had nearly forgotten about these feelings when Jackie came back to work and we carried on as usual. This past Wednesday it was just me and Jackie working because it wasn't too busy. I was going back to the bathroom to wipe my nose when halfway through the back of the store I heard my name in a whisper yell. It sounded like my friend Jackie, but oh well, she's experienced, so whatever she needs, I can help with later. I continue walking to the bathroom when in the hallway I hear my name again. Same tone, same whisper, but this time, Martha, hurry. Thinking that's weird, I turn around and go to ask Jackie what she needs. She says she didn't call me, so I start to get a little freaked out. Maybe it was the song that was playing. I turn back around to go wipe my nose, and the whole way to the bathroom, my name is said, same tone, same whisper, sounds like Jackie. I'm weirded out, but I know it's not her, and she comes back to see what's going on. I tell her, and we both try to debunk it because we're terrified. We both blame it on the song rhythm, thinking maybe I just heard something wrong, and we get back to work. I hadn't thought about it until later Thursday night when I closed with Jackie again. Just us once more, and she comes up to me while I'm sweeping. She asks if I called her name. I say it only once, just barely. She says she heard it twice, the same whisper tone, and it sounded like me. Now listen, I could have said her name earlier, although I don't recall whispering it. And I'm deaf, not actually just hard of hearing, so I know whatever was whispered to me had to be something right in my ear, and she wasn't there. I love my work, but I'm terrified. I don't know what's happening. Creepy, unexplainable experience. I can't really remember how old I was, but it was during primary school. To set the setting, I used to live on a 60-acre farm in Mangrove Mountain in NSW, Australia, and the house I lived in is the same house the past tenants lived and died in sometime around 1960, but there was a backyard behind the house. This is where I used to ride my bike around the backyard during the afternoon after school until dark, and I couldn't really see anything, so I'd eventually have to go inside. On Christmas my aunt got me a light that went onto the handlebars of a bicycle. It was something similar to the Heika Super Bright headlight. I'm getting goosebumps thinking about this, but anyway, it was my first or second time using the light, and I was just doing laps of the backyard on my bike. About half an hour passed by, and I realized I lost a part of the light. As I was looking for a rubber cap for the light on the bike that fell off and I couldn't find. By the way, I was at the top of the yard, which is behind the house in between the trees, and it was basically pitch black behind me apart from the kitchen light outside the back window around 20 meters in front of me. In that moment, out of nowhere, I heard really loud stomping and a galloping rhythm from behind me and a blood-curdling scream. I dropped my bike and started sprinting for the front door, which was around 70 meters away. I heard it behind me stomping and grunting until I reached the breezeway. It just vanished. I ran inside, out of breath and crying hysterically, a state you rarely saw me in, especially since it was later in primary school, around year 5 or 6. I didn't even have time to think, and my body just dropped the bike and sprinted. It was as if I wasn't in my body. It couldn't have been a cow or a horse because we had barbed wire fences, which I am certain prevented either animal from entering. Around 3 to 4 years later, I moved houses to Umina Beach, NSW, Australia, further away from that area. My dad's boss was letting the other employees live in that house, and one of them was alone for a night and decided to light a fire in the paddock. She was enjoying the fire, and then she heard a scream. The same scream as that I heard. All the animals in the area went off, and all the dogs were barking. I know it was the same scream because we both initially thought it wasn't real, but after discussing it, she showed me a video that sounded identical. After that day I never went back outside again. What would have happened if it stopped running or turned to look back? It sounded so close to me. But as I said before, the people died in that house, and I didn't believe in ghosts or anything, but they said they heard things. My dad didn't believe in ghosts or anything, so he stayed a night there and went inside by himself in pitch black with no lights on. He kept trying to joke around, saying, show yourself, and everyone was outside because they were too scared to go in, but there was glass across the front of the house so you could see in. Nothing was there, but when he went outside, everyone had goosebumps and was shaking. They then said, there was a shadow behind you following you. It really sounds unbelievable, but it's the way they convinced me. A couple of weeks later, they all moved out, and the same person who had heard the scream moved into the flat. There were tall glass windows near the kitchen area around 9 feet high. She was sitting down with her guinea pigs and birds when she saw a silhouette of a head and neck and shoulders walk rather fast across the window. All the animals freaked out and started hiding, and she jumped into her bed under her blanket. All of this was unexplainable. As I am writing and thinking about this, I have goosebumps, and my eyes are watering, and I don't want to move. To that guy in the bushes. So, I walk my dog every day at late hours so she can sleep the night through. She's a bit old by now, and she once got in a traffic accident, meaning she can't hold her pee every now and then. The route is almost the same every time, at almost the same hours, 9 p.m/10 p.m. We, my fiancé and I, live in a quieter part of our town, meaning that by that time of day it is even quieter and no one is on the streets in this part. Additionally, it's more of a side street with few to no street lights and houses. There is a specific area of bushes and grass where my dog likes to relieve herself. She's very outgoing and always cheerful, likes to jump around and run, etc. But this one day at that part of our route, she was kind of acting up. Like she was cautious or something. I kind of felt her uneasiness and felt somewhat anxious myself by now. So we go our way to where her favorite potty place is, the aforementioned grass/bushes thingy, and we proceed with our routine. As I stood there, I heard sounds beside/behind me, like branches being moved or leaves being stepped on, and my dog reacted to it too, a mix of growling and whimpering. I, ducking nervous at that point, just wanted to go home. As I continued on my path, just a few seconds later, a man emerged from the bushes where my dog and I had been standing. He stared directly in my way, just standing there. I froze in surprise and fear. I couldn't move. My dog barked, and all of a sudden, he sprinted towards me. At this point I just kind of run without thinking. I then arrived at a section of our route that had houses and, thankfully, light. I looked behind me, and he wasn't there anymore. The point is, I always felt safe when walking there. But lately I've gotten the feeling of being watched or followed. I can't describe it. I got the feeling my dog sensed something too a few weeks before. I didn't tell my fiancé that the incident happened, because I don't want her to be worried. Something similar didn't happen again, but I still get freaked out walking that way. I hammock camp in remote woodland at a spot that's very out of the way. I'm a local to the area, and as far as I know, it's a spot nobody ever frequents. I woke up one evening about midnight and had a feeling I was being watched. I hammock camp, so it's possible to see me if I've not pitched the fly low. I looked to my right, and there were two girls standing, staring at me. It definitely gave me a shock. I took my earbuds out and asked if they were okay. They were lost, and I think they had been debating quietly whether to wake me. After getting out and getting my boots on, I led them a few miles to where their friends were camping. They described where they were camping, and I knew straight away the spot. Once we saw their tents, they muttered a quick, "Thank you," and ran off. At first, I was a little put out that I'd gone to so much effort to see them to safety, and all I got was a quick, thanks and them turning tail. But on the way home I was trying to see it from their perspective. I think they were scared from being lost in the woods at night and then finding this guy on his own in the woods. That's unusual to people not used to camping, right? With ropes in the trees, my ridgeline, and a hatchet hanging from a prusique knot as I slept, makes me feel safer to keep it close by. I always wear a fixed blade on my belt, and in my sleep-addled brain, I forgot to take it off, so they were walking behind me, and all they'd see is a huge knife bouncing off my back. They were definitely city girls unused to camping. They were dressed horribly for the woods, I think with a crowd of other teenagers. It's funny how, initially, we were all scared of each other. I hate the idea of someone watching me as I sleep out in the woods. But I got over it very quickly, and hopefully, once they got back, and likely a few calming beers, they at least had a good story to tell their pals about the wild man of the woods that led them to safety. Even gave them a Snickers each. My only paranormal encounter, that was 3 weeks long. My girl and I met each other at a folk hogskole called Baki Tun, built 1915, in Verdal, Norway. I didn't research the school before going, but if you look on the internet, you'll find it has a rather dark and unexplainable history, from deaths in the school to spirits being heard and seen in the sub-basement. The place had never given me the creeps before, and I'd never been a believer of the paranormal before. When I first started talking to my girl, she told me that she'd had a lot of contact with the spirits at the school. She had been talking to spirits all her life and accidentally summoned demons from her bathroom mirror when she was 8 years old. Anyway, we started living together at the school in January of this year, and for the first few months, nothing was out of the ordinary. It all began on an evening in early March when we ventured out around 9 p.m. for a cigarette. She'd told me before how she's spoken to spirits at the smoking hut, and the grounds outside it are very active. While we had the smoke, nothing happened, but on the walk back to the school, maybe 100 meters, we both felt very uneasy. Just as we got into the light of the front door, she stopped and looked behind us into the dark. She told me something was watching us, and we both looked into the darkness, hoping to see a badger or a fox. After maybe 30 seconds, she pushed me into the school and followed quickly behind me as we heard footsteps on the gravel that quickly turned into a run. Then for a few more weeks we had nothing. Towards late March we unpacked my old PS4 and took it to an empty room on the 3rd floor of the school with a projector to play games undisturbed. The entire 3rd floor has always had a really heavy atmosphere, and I always thought it was because there are a lot of windows, so the sun all day makes it stuffy. Anyway, we played for about 2 hours, and it got to maybe 1,900 hours. I needed a piss. So I went to the tiny toilet at the top of the stairs on the 3rd floor, at the end of a long corridor. As soon as I went into the bathroom, I felt an atmosphere like I'd never felt before. Heavy and sad, the air was bitter and smelled like sulfur. I thought it was the drains, and I was burning with almost a fever. I was very uneasy and pissed quickly. Then when I was washing my hands, I looked at my reflection in the mirror above the sink, and even though I was looking at myself, I also wasn't. There was something different that I couldn't put my finger on. I ignored it and quickly left for the safety of the projector room and my girl. A while later she went to the same bathroom but came back seconds later saying she'd rather hold it in. I asked what was up. I hadn't told her about my experience yet, and she said all the same stuff as me, with the addition that she got tunnel vision as soon as she opened the bathroom door. We turned on the lights in the room we were in and tried to keep playing, but then things got weirder. There was a room next door to that room that was used by the drama students. All the walls were mirrors, and the floor was the original floor from 1915. From the door leading into that room, we started hearing tapping on glass and footsteps walking around in a loop, and the breaking point for us was a bang on the door into our room. We packed our shit and left. The whole walk back to our bedroom, which was directly under the projector room, felt unnerving. Hairs on the back of our neck standing up, shortness of breath, you know. We got to the room and tried to have a good rest of our evening, laughing, talking, and listening to music. But both of us still felt anxious, as if we were being watched. We went to bed, and the next morning we both woke up having similar nightmares. My girl dreamt that she was a student at the school when it first opened, but then all her classmates got hollow eyes, and her face started melting as they attacked her. My dream was darkness, with nothing but a disembodied deep voice spelling both of our names over and over again until I woke up. The next night we went back to the projector room, and similar things happened, only we heard grunting and more bangs on the door. After we walked back to our dorm, we sat in the common room, and I noticed my girl had a bright red mark on her neck. As if something sharp had been dragged across it. At this point we couldn't be alone, so we had to go to the bathroom together and shower together, etc. The heavy, sad presence and the smell seemed to follow us everywhere. I was never marked, but she was a lot. She came out of the shower once with what looked like 3 bright red claw marks stretching right across her chest and stomach. We decided to cleanse our room, as she is a practicing witch and we're both pagan, and we wanted at least one safe spot. We laid a salt line across our doorway and covered the mirror in the room over with a blanket. She did the ritual, but halfway through, even though all doors and windows were closed, the candlelight was blown out quickly. I couldn't bear to look in any reflective surface, and I hadn't slept in a few days at this point. We began walking around the school with protective runes carved into stone. Things calmed down for a while, and one night she decided to go to the bathroom alone. Only to run back to me moments later as something started banging hard on the bathroom door as soon as she sat on the toilet. We decided to do another ritual, not for cleansing but for protection, using our blood and some soil from the grounds. At around 11 p.m., we were digging up soil from the ground beneath a large tree. We both heard heavy and quick footsteps rushing towards us that faded into nothing. We quickly made our way to our room and made our offerings and then went to sleep, hoping for the best. Woke up the next morning to see the salt line had been disturbed but not fully broken, a good sign that what we're doing is working. Then we didn't experience anything for a while. During the weekend, while my girlfriend and I were walking back to our dorm after a party at the school, we noticed several damp footprints that seemed to start from nowhere and led into the old assembly hall, where pictures of all past students hung on the walls. We didn't dare to follow them. We were going to New York a week later, so we started wondering if we should contact the spirits to see if they were trying to warn us about something. We went up to the 3rd floor with our Ouija board and some candles, and as we opened the door leading onto the corridor, we were both hit by a blast of boiling hot wind and the smell of sulfur again. We were scared but contacted them anyway and ended up speaking to the girl who died in her bed not far from the room we were in. She was a friendly spirit and told us a little about her past. We learned she liked Elvis, so we played it whenever we were near the area she died in, but after about an hour of talking, we heard the sulfur smell start again faintly, and the board started getting quiet. She responded to everything we asked with only no and can't. Then, our candles went out, prompting us to think, duck this, and leave. After a few undisturbed nights, we uncovered the bedroom mirror and started feeling more comfortable in our room again. Then we went to New York. We came back after nearly 3 weeks away from the place and still felt the presence of whatever was there, but less intensely. The haunting lasted for around 24 days, pretty creepy. Any ideas why we got targeted? Why was the entity that accompanied us trying to harm my girlfriend? My theory is because it was a Christian school and our beliefs might have seemed offensive. Please let me know what you guys think. Unsettling grandma. This happened around a year ago when I was 19, before December. I was chilling at my house when suddenly someone rang our doorbell, so I went to answer it with my father. Before our door, a poor grandma around 80 years old stood there, holding like 3 heavy bags full of groceries. She quickly spoke up as she asked if we have a car, to which we replied we don't and asked why she needed one. She said that she had a heart problem, did not take her medicine, and was feeling dizzy. I offered to call her an ambulance, but she said she did not want to annoy them and that she had already asked a bunch of people, who just laughed her off. Since I had some time before my boyfriend returned from his work party, I told her to wait a moment while I escorted her home. I grabbed a coat, some shoes, and my nearly dead phone and went with her, only telling my father that I was going out. Mind you, it was now around 8:30 p.m. She started telling me how she feels sick while I carried her heavy bags and told me that she lives at the bottom of a hill that we have here. So we walked together, but she stopped every few meters to take a breath, as she was around 80 years old. After about half an hour, we reached the bottom of the hill, but then she suddenly mentioned that she actually lives much higher up. I thought okay, but the hill was connected to a forest, and the lighting there was poor, so on the left you only saw dark forest and on the right a few houses. As I dragged her bags up the hill, she kept on making stops every few seconds, and the more she made them, the more I started to feel paranoid. My phone was almost dead, and some creepy noises were coming from the forest. After almost another half hour of listening to her stories about her life, She started to make weird remarks. Every time I looked into the forest, she kept on telling me not to look since there is nothing there, only animals, not weird, right? But she kept on saying something about her rich neighbor that wants to end her and must not see us together or he would shoot us. The more we walked up the hill, the sicker I felt. Then we finally made a turn into a dark alley without any light as she slowly dragged herself against the railing. She forced me to duck my head and even turn off my light, telling me that the neighbor will end me. The closer we got to her gate, the more ruinous and abandoned it looked. It was around 9:35 p.m. when we got to her gate that she chained up at the bottom. She did not allow me to use my light to release the chain, but I was so stressed out that I just did it my way anyway. The door opened as I peeked into her overgrown garden full of trees, not even seeing a house. It was dark, and she told me to go deeper in, but carefully, as it had no path and tree branches were in the way. After a few meters, suddenly a large man with an unkempt beard and hair came out, greeting us and introducing himself as her son as he started to lay down small candles near the trees to light up our way. I felt nauseous and afraid for my life, as if I were walking into a sacrificial ritual. After the man excused himself to grab more candles, I told the grandma that my mom was calling me and quickly headed towards the gate while she was speaking to me. I was terrified, so I slammed the gate behind me and ran away, glancing back every second, fearing that the man would be chasing after me. After getting down the hill and into my house, it was already around 10 p.m. Her house is like a 20-minute walk from my house, but her stopping every second made it longer. When I got home, I realized that my father did not bother telling my mother I even went outside, so when I told her what happened, she freaked out, as literally no one knew I went out for more than an hour, not even my boyfriend, apart from my father. The grandma was probably mentally ill, but damn, it was so darn creepy. It has been around a year since it happened, but the image of the candles lighting up the overgrown garden and not seeing even a small building creeps me out. My boyfriend keeps on telling me what I did was stupid, and yeah, it was. Creepy moment. Every time I tell it to anyone, they ask me if it really did happen, as it sounds creepy, ha. Old building built in 1912, graveyard shift security. I am a security officer. I just recently got a job at an emergency shelter doing the graveyard shift. I am convinced that this building is haunted. I researched that it was built in 1912, and it was taken over by my company in 2015, about 7 years since they have had it. When I first started, I didn't feel any way about it until I got this unnerving feeling 2 months in. In my gut there was a feeling of being watched by someone/something unseen. I felt uneasy, feeling like I couldn't relax or go to sleep on my break time, which I took around 5:30 a.m. to 6:30 a.m. There is a weird vibe in the unit day or night, which they use for a break room and also a case manager's office during the day. Although I haven't experienced anything supernatural, I firmly believe in the presence of a spirit or spirits, as evidenced by 3 occurrences that caught my attention. 1. One day at my desk, the garbage lid shook as if someone placed something in it. 2. I saw the bathroom door in the unit move. The window was barely open, and there wasn't a wind. The window is between buildings. 3. Also on the CCTV camera one morning, February 12, 2022, at 6:18 a.m., I witnessed the attendance sheets the residents signed to go in/out on the platform attached to the door flip up in the air and stay that way on the clipboard for about 2 minutes until I put them back in their original position. I was scared, and I knew the other papers on the wall didn't move that fast. If there was wind, they would have all reacted that way. I spent 2 months in this break room before anyone told me anything. All alone from 5:30 a.m. to 6:30 a.m., and let's include that on my patrols I used to go in the unit to vape in the bathroom. That's why I liked it, because I had privacy. Well, I thought I did. They all said the same thing when I told them about the feeling of fear. I don't want to take breaks there anymore. They said, yup, upstairs is creepy. Please note they are always complaining about being cold in the hot building that has old radiator poles and portable heaters they turn on. But I know the cold/hot feeling of a strange presence when I feel it. As of June 12, 2022, I am still working here and still feel uneasy every day and do everything to avoid the break room, the basement, and the empty unit by myself. This one staff member told me she was one day in the eerie break room and heard someone call her name, and no one was in the small unit, and now she doesn't go there. There is also a spooky alarm clock in the case manager's office in the eerie break room that goes off exactly at 11:04 p.m. The case manager doesn't even work at night, so what's the alarm for? Every night I got in to go to the locker room as if it were waiting for me or something. Yup, it goes off every night in the unit non-stop, and there are noises of mice running around. They also had a rat infestation from the next door building, and there are a lot of rats running around the yard. Everything is just creepy. I notice a sweet smell like an air freshener, and there isn't one plugged in. Another staff member and I were wondering what the smell was. For a second, I possibly thought it could be the entity because the smell comes and goes. There is also this other familiar, distinctive smell of a vape flavor, which it smells like but is not the same flavor I'm currently using, on the floor of the break room. I haven't even gone there, it's been a week now. Like, is this thing sending smells to get attention as well? At 4:04 a.m. sitting at the front desk, not even near the entrance, and the sensor door makes noises after someone has entered/exited, but no one is there. Sitting at the front desk again all alone, 2 other staff in the department room are inside a room, and they are sleeping. I witnessed with my very own eyes the garbage lid move again from the place it's been in for hours and swing closed. I was frightened because it's not the first time it has happened, but it's the first time I caught it. I will be considering a transfer soon if things don't settle. I don't think I'm strong enough to work in a place knowing it is haunted. Haunted night shift. So I'm not sure who all believes in ghosts, and I for sure didn't think any of the hotels in our small town were haunted really until I came to work at one of the larger ones we had. I had worked the night shift for 2 years by that point and had moved on to work at a new hotel. During my night shifts, I experienced some strange occurrences, but many of them could be explained by other factors. I believed, or at least wanted to believe, there was something, as I loved watching ghost shows and other paranormal things. There were things that happened at this hotel, though, that I could not explain, and I can write at least 10 different stories about those, but I'm going to help set this up briefly. There were 3 supposed ghosts that haunted this hotel, one that haunted the restaurant, one in the convention center, and one in the upstairs back hall. The hotel where I worked, which I left for reasons unrelated to the ghosts, has a layout featuring rooms arranged in a giant U shape, with a courtyard in the center and a pool at the open end of the U. A hallway connects a convention center, and at the open end of the U shape are the front desk and restaurant. Each night, we were required to slide receipts under the doors of this 158-room hotel. This task wasn't difficult and took about 30 minutes, as some rooms had carpets that were very close to the floor, making it necessary to maneuver the paper underneath. I usually started my path on the side closest to the front desk, then circled back past the pool to check it, went upstairs to complete that loop, and finally checked the convention center and back rooms for security, since we didn't have security personnel. Doors leading to the stairwells divided the rooms in a U shape. I had heard noises such as whispers, laughter, and glasses clinking in the restaurant area and the closed offices behind the front desk, but nothing else beyond that. The one in the convention area I'd only heard stories about from pale-faced convention center workers that were closing up for the night. The one in the back upstairs room hall, though, was the one that I and the other night auditors that trained me and I worked with were scared of. This one has sent people who were in those rooms up to the desk pale and shaking, wanting room changes. I was doing my nightly walkthrough, having just finished the first floor and doing the second. I was just passing through the door to the stairwell to continue on and push the door open for the back part of the U shape when I blinked, realizing it was significantly hotter in that hallway than any of the previous ones. It wasn't abnormal for the halls to be different temps, but this was a big difference. Kind of shrugging, I kept going and put paper under doors. On the inside corner of the U was a vending area for guests to get soda and snacks. This is important. The entrance to the vending area led into the long part of the hall, rather than the short section that goes to the stairwell, allowing anyone entering or exiting to be seen. While I was walking to the corner room, I heard a thump against the glass of the vending machine. Turning around, I didn't see anything there. Shrugging it off as a possible machine bump, I kept going, making my way down the hallway, but it felt like eyes were on me. As I got to the halfway point in the long hall, I heard it again, but this time it was 3 loud thumps on the glass of the vending machine. Walking back toward it, I looked around to see if anyone was there but saw no one. Looking at the vending machine, I noticed a bag of chips somehow wedged up into the little shelf that held gum, with only a little bit sticking out. I'm not sure why that caught my eye, but it did. I decided to check if anyone entered that room, so I backed down the hallway while still feeling as though someone was watching me. Bending down to put another piece of paper under the door, I glanced away from the vending area for a moment just to hear, shh, bang. Taking off down the hall to the vending machine area, I noticed that the vending machine had moved over at least 2 inches, the slight marks on the floor where it had been sitting clearly visible. Sweat rolled down my face as I looked at it and backed up a few feet, the hair on the back of my neck starting to stand on end now as I realized the hallway was even hotter than before. As I backed up, something that felt like a hand brushed over my shoulder before this deep dark voice brushed against my ear with a soft boo. I took off down the hall, and I could hear laughing and heavy footsteps running after me as I sprinted. Going through the other side stairwell door, I heard something slam into the door behind me as that feeling of dread and evil left, though that haunting laughter still followed me for a moment. The stairwell felt infinitely cooler than that hall had. Looking at the door where that thing had just slammed, I saw a clear as day handprint on the glass that I knew hadn't been there before, as I'd cleaned the windows 2 hours previously, and it was currently 4 a.m. I ran back to the front desk and just sat there shaking as the accountant came in early to get some work done, as they were leaving early for vacation. They asked if I was going to pass out receipts, and I told them nope. If they wanted to do it, go ahead, because I wasn't going back up there again. Hello. I need advice on this paranormal encounter I experienced last night. To preface this, my great-grandpa built this house in his 20s and died around 2015. His wife died in 2013. We moved in early 2016. I live in their bedroom, and we have all experienced paranormal experiences in this house before. This was something different. Usually when something paranormal happens, the energy feels familiar. Like my family. Last night was something entirely different. I was lying in bed around 12 a.m. scrolling through videos to keep myself awake. My lights were off and my closet was open. I never close it even when I sleep, yet I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Around 1 a.m. I decided to get ready. My friend was picking me up at 1:30 a.m. to go watch the meteor shower. I left my room to go to the bathroom to do my makeup. When I left and looked past the living room into the kitchen, there was a shadow figure. The blackest black I have ever seen before. My great-grandparents have never shown themselves in this way. I looked at it for what felt like 20 minutes before it beelined to my mom's room. Turns out only 1 minute had passed. Once back into my room, I hear a loud noise from my closet. I go to my closet and see that all my hangers with my clothes had fallen to the ground. Later, after I got home around 3 a.m., as soon as I walked into my room, my chest felt heavy, and I started hyperventilating until I had to go outside to catch my breath. When I was finally able to go back into my room, I realized that my closet was shut, my gas mask and my ghost face mask had fallen, this white body-length mirror was now facing my bed, and stuff that was on my vanity was now on my bed or my floor. I did not leave my room that way. I cleaned it up and went to bed. As soon as I closed my eyes, I felt eyes on me from my closet. I ended up closing it. About 15 minutes later I was scrolling on TikTok again, and I heard someone saying my name in a sing-songy way from my closet. I ignored it, but a few minutes later it was banging on the inside of my closet and yelling my name in an angry way. I am not sure when I fell asleep, but I woke up to this, my closet door open, and that heavy feeling gone. My room almost felt calm. I am not sure what happened last night, nor why this was in my house. I had said many times, "You are not welcome here. Please go away now." I have never had any negative encounters in this house, and it has always been my great-grandma and great-grandpa. They are calm and familiar spirits. This felt like it had bad intentions. Any advice? I had a very creepy and unexplainable experience last night at work. I work in residential care at a house where 5 people with autism live. Yesterday, one of the girls, called Kay, was in a very bad mood all day. She was throwing tantrums, screaming, and hitting herself. Occasionally she had some absent moments and stared at the ground or at the wall. This is very unusual behavior because she had always been the most active and best behaved patient in the house. Kay has had some seizures recently and hasn't been herself since her most recent seizure last week. The experience happened at about 20:50 as we were waiting for the night shift staff to swap with us. I, A, and L were standing in the hall chatting as we waited. Kay was standing in the laundry room in the dark, staring at a wall. We stayed outside the door in case anything happened to Kay. We were at the end of the hall, and behind us were 3 doors, the kitchen door to the left, the sitting room door directly behind, and the playroom door to the right. The kitchen and playroom door were open and held open by specialized door stoppers. The door stoppers are designed to lift and let the door close when lots of noise is made. The reason for this is if a patient is trying to attack staff, the closing doors slow down the patient so everyone can run. These doors closed by themselves without any loud noise being made. First the kitchen door closed, and then the playroom door. We thought nothing of it since the playroom door stopper is faulty anyway. As soon as the playroom door closed, a vintage radio inside the room started playing static at full blast. I went into the room and took the radio out and showed it to me and Elle. We all freaked out because of the door closing and then an old radio coming on. I got up to check on Kay, and she was still standing in the dark room staring at nothing. I was so freaked out and couldn't look at her because I had the idea she was possessed or something. I have no reason to believe that, it's just my imagination. Night staff arrived, and I ran for the hills. I was told the house I worked at was haunted, but I always laughed it off. I've seen shadows in the corner of my eye in one bedroom, but I always came up with an explanation for them despite being very unsettled. This event has unnerved me so badly that I'm afraid of what I'll see next in the house. If anyone can give a good explanation for this, I would love to hear it. A creaky old porch and knocks in the night. This curious event happened to a teenage girl in the late 1960s on a farm in rural Kansas. Her name was Linda, and she told it to a group of us girls at a Sunday school girls' sleepover when she was an adult teacher of the class. Linda used to babysit for a family on a neighboring cattle ranch. It was an older farmhouse with the first floor surrounded on all sides by a wooden porch, which was extremely creaky due to age. In that area, many families did not lock their doors, as it was considered completely safe. One night, she was babysitting their 3 young children, who were already asleep. She had been told the parents would be out late. While she was reading, a knock at the door surprised her because she had not heard any footsteps on the noisy porch. However, she quickly opened the front door and found nobody there. She stepped out, looked around, and went back inside to resume reading. About 10 minutes later, again in the silence came a loud knock. Assuming this would clear up the mystery of who had been there before, she once again opened it, and of course, nobody was there. This time, she closed the door, but instead of returning to her book and the couch, she stood behind the door just listening. Quiet minutes passed, and here came another knock out of the silence. As you guessed, there was still nobody there. Though puzzled, she was not actually frightened, just confused. Fortunately, there were no more knocks that night, and the parents returned. One of them drove her home, and that was that. We did ask her why she wasn't scared, and she answered that as a teen in an area with no crime, she was too innocent to consider any potential danger. She had not even locked the door after the mystery knocks. She did not even mention it to anyone until later the next morning, when the farmer called to ask if she had seen or heard anyone around the place the night before. She explained what had occurred, and he told her that all the cattle had trampled down a wide section of fence and apparently stampeded out, so they had spent hours that morning rounding them all up from around the countryside. According to Linda, she was not aware of anything similar happening either before or after that incident. They might have suspected youthful pranks, but that was not an issue there. It wasn't cattle rustling, as the farmer found them all. There was never an explanation for the knocking on the door, especially since no footsteps creaked across the ancient porch. It was likely an act that people committed for various reasons, yet it remained a strange event. I've been having paranormal encounters a lot lately, and I don't understand it yet. I've had a lot of encounters in the last decade of my life, but I mostly just brush them off as panic attacks since I have severe anxiety and agoraphobia. I try to convince myself that I am simply paranoid or delusional to avoid confronting or overthinking the situation, but recently it has become overwhelming, and I feel confused about what to believe. For reference, I live in a town in Texas very close to the DFW area, about 40 minutes from the nearest city. It takes me just 10 minutes to drive out to the desolate countryside, so a lot of these experiences have happened around rural areas or late at night when everyone else is asleep. When I was a kid, I had debilitating sleep paralysis. I still have it but barely experience it anymore because I found sleeping on my side works wonders to keep it from happening for some reason. I also would see these things at night, like shadow figures or something, and they would terrify me. My older sister was really into spooky TV shows and horror movies, so I figured that she was just freaking me out and making me hallucinate all the time. But it has always felt like something is watching me, I guess. There's a field above my house where I've seen things come out of the trees, like quick wispy shadows that disappear. I always get this unique, unsettling feeling when I encounter them. It's like otherworldly anxiety. I also drove into the mountains one night with an ex to watch a lunar eclipse once. I could swear I saw a normal house look completely abandoned and haunted on the drive-by, and then from there the air shifted, and it felt like there was a lot of activity in the hills. I could feel something almost trying to attack me while I drove. My ex said he felt it too, so we held hands and tried to comfort each other on the way. The feeling I got from the whole thing was that the hills were alive and there was something ancient going on. I found out more about how that particular area had wars going on in it back in the day and was the way they would take to send people to psychiatric wards or something. The building that looked messed up looked completely normal the next day, and I found out it wasn't a house but some sort of old commerce building. When I was little, I also saw a girl that looked kinda like the girl from the ring in my doorway at night with a couple of friends, and they agreed that they saw her too. They could have just been agreeing with me, though. We were kids. What happened last night happened in this park. I've seen things before in the park. Once I was walking in the woods alone during the day and heard this strange music coming from somewhere. It was like clown music. And it wasn't just someone playing Insane Clown Posse or something outside, it was just strange. And then I got that supernatural feeling, Thought I might have seen something, and then ran out. Another time, I was walking the concrete trails at night, and I saw something about 100 feet in front of me sticking out of the tree line. It looked tall, like some sort of giant rock or maybe even a robot entity. I didn't get a great look at it, but then I ran away again. The feeling I got from that one was so intense I didn't go back to the park for a while and still don't go there as often anymore. But last night I decided to go back with my boyfriend. It was kind of stormy and started pouring down while we were walking the trails for a bit. We didn't want our phones to get wet, and we were too far from our car to turn back, so we ran under this bench with an awning. In front of the bench was a part of the concrete trails, behind us were train tracks and more trails, and in front of us on the other side of the concrete were the backyards of some houses. In this particular area there's railing and a small drop-off into a gutter, sort of, I guess? We were sitting talking in the rain, waiting for it to pass, and that's when I saw something moving in the grass in front of us. I thought it must be the wind, but I kept watching and figured it might be an animal. It moved the grass over sort of slithery? Almost like a tail flicking in the tall weeds. I thought, maybe a snake? But then I saw it sort of come up over the short drop-off and wondered how big it was. I figured it couldn't be bigger than a cat or a small dog. It poked its head up, I guess, and I got a strong feeling of being watched. Like I could just intuitively tell that it was taking some type of interest in me, almost like scouting and checking me out. But the movements were strange and contorted, and the rain was pouring so hard I couldn't really make out what it was. It didn't feel like an animal for some reason. I've just never run into an animal that had that much intention with checking over and ducking and hiding from me while appearing again. I remember telling my boyfriend at first, "There's something in the grass over there," and he was like, "Nah, it's just the wind." I said, "No, there's something there," and then he looked, and that's when we both saw it poke its head/body up again very quickly and sort of go back down, and we got freaked out, and then we watched it for a second longer and started running. I have to emphasize that it almost made it look like it was not there sometimes but then made itself appear again, but it was so hard to make out any distinct features. I thought it might be a wet skunk. Or a snake? But it looked too big to be a snake at times. Maybe it was coiled up? Either way, we were both freaked out. My boyfriend and I ran as fast as we could in the other direction, and I found a gate that enters the neighborhood above the trail, but it was locked, so we hopped over it, and we ran into a field beside the houses. When I turned back, out of nowhere, there was a deer, but it looked so black I was scared it was a skinwalker, so I told my boyfriend to run again, and we did. Keep in mind I was wearing wedges, and it was raining so hard, so I had to stop to take them off. I got some stickers I had to yank out, they hurt so bad, but we ran up into the houses where it felt safer and looped back around on the other side of the park. The deer was at the park entrance again, so it must have gone all the way around to meet us. The woods are huge, what are the chances we would run into it again? Right after we went all the way away from it for 15 minutes? I was convinced it was something and walked away to find another route, but my boyfriend went up to it and screamed, "Leave, go," and all of a sudden it got way lighter in color and then scurried off into the woods. We walked back to the car from there and saw nothing else. I tried really hard to deduce what kind of animal it could have been, if any. It was raining really hard, and I tried to consider what would be out in the rain, how animals look different when they are wet, and what kind of animal would curiously hide from us in sneak peeks. I'm not sure. My boyfriend was convinced it was some sort of monster. He said he saw black hands on it holding the concrete as it lurched itself up to look at us. He said it looked like it almost had an absence of eyes or something. I didn't see it in that much detail. I'd just like to know what y'all think of this. Has anyone else had an encounter like this? The other thing is my lights in my house have been flickering in strange ways lately. Like when I walk in, they will flicker at me but stay normal when I'm away from them. Last night, I activated the porch light, and as soon as I stepped beneath it, it began flickering erratically. However, after entering the house and commanding it to cease, I returned outside, and the flickering had completely ceased. The light in the hallway near my room has also been flickering frequently. I have been trying to contact my dead relatives lately. I've been visiting the cemetery and trying to ask my grandma to come see me. But I'm not sure if it's her. I'm just tired of being scared every time I want to go out. Let me know what you think. I usually don't care about graveyard shifts, but now I'm terrified. I work a graveyard shift as a security guard for a recycling yard. I can't mention the company for obvious reasons. I've been on this site for 2 weeks, with this being the second week of my shift. Basically every hour I make rounds across a giant recycling yard covered in various precious metals that are broken down and sold. Throughout my shift, I monitor various checkpoints to make sure no one else is present in the yard or facility. One of my other tasks is to go through some grassy/bushy terrain and over a set of train tracks to take a photo of a warehouse far across. This is to ensure it is safe and clear. I have to use a flashlight with 2K lumens so I can see my way through pretty much the entire yard. Well, just an hour and a half ago on my round, I went through the grass and over the train tracks. I took the picture of the warehouse and submitted it. All of a sudden I get this intense feeling that I'm being watched. The hairs on my neck stand up, and I freeze. My flashlight is still on and pointing at the warehouse. I slowly turn around and point my flashlight behind me. Kid you not, about 10 yards away I see a skinny, old, wrinkled white man with a large white beard sitting on a chair. He was looking directly at me. He had dirty jean overalls and what I think was a Western-style cowboy fedora on. He was bare-skinned under the overalls. Now I'm a 6 feet, 220-pound man, but I screamed F-word. At an embarrassing pitch. Accidentally, I dropped my flashlight out of shock. Mind you, there are thin tiny metal shards literally everywhere on the ground. I can't see a damn thing now, as the flashlight is facing away from my sight. All I hear is the quick-paced shuffling/clanging of metal from footsteps quickly running towards me. Once the metal crunching footsteps are within maybe 5 feet of me, I hear them quickly veer to the left and past me. Within 3 to 4 seconds the metal clanging is gone, followed by the faraway sound of rustling bushes. I then grabbed my flashlight from the ground and pointed it at the sound. The old man was gone, past the bushes to who knows where. I was shaking from adrenaline and fear. I managed to catch my breath and called several emergency contacts. When they arrived, the old man was long gone. I believe maybe he was just there to watch the active trains move across. I say this because the metal chair was facing the tracks. It's still there. I photographed it. More as a memento, if anything. I am now in the office, still terrified and alone. I have to finish my shift tonight, and tomorrow I have another 11-hour graveyard. I won't quit, as I need the money. I just wanted to get this off my chest. So I was thinking of a night camping where the things that went bump weren't what I thought they were. I and some of my good friends were going to hike in 5 miles on a Friday, fish an inaccessible section of the river for a state record, and hike out Sunday. I say it's inaccessible because the whole river gets pushed into a canyon for 3 miles, and the only way you can fish it is to stay in the water, occasionally swimming between holes. Well, something happened, and they couldn't come down until Saturday morning. I hiked in, made sure the trail was marked well for them, set up camp in the afternoon, and took off for the river to catch supper. I fished a few holes below camp to catch supper and ended up catching 4 over 20 inches. I cooked them up in a frying pan I kept hidden back there, and the sky started clouding up with long, black, rolling clouds with a touch of green. I double-checked my tarps, dug a shallow ditch around camp, and made sure my tarp was hung well over the fire, and then it came all of a sudden. It was blowing sideways, but I didn't worry. I know how to build strong shelters. I broke out the bottle of bourbon I rolled in the center of my bedroll, leaned back in my hammock, and watched it just pour down. The lightning was constant, and it started to crack all around me. I had a good view as twilight was starting of the tracks across the river. With a boom, I watched lightning strike the tracks and run right up the rails for 50 yards. I took a few long drinks out of the bottle and dozed off as the storm calmed down to a drizzle in the dark. I awoke to the steady dripping of rain falling off the timber of a storm long since past in the pitch black. The fire had died down to just a glow of hot coals, and I didn't set my lantern out in the rain. I dug in the pocket of my hammock for my flashlight. I had the sense to put my pistol and my flashlight before I dozed off in my hammock. As I was rolling out of my hammock, I heard a sound in front of me within 15 yards, and then a squeal to my right, and a growl/purr. I soon heard it all around me. The hair started standing up on my neck as I couldn't place what kind of creatures made all those sounds or could be that numerous. I sat real still, waiting for a moment for whatever it was to stop where I could spot it with my flashlight and my gun. I turned on my light and saw eyes through the sights of my gun, eyes about half a foot setting on the moss squalling, and I smiled. In my buzz/sleepy state, I had left the remainder of my fish setting in the skillet on the rocks beside the fire, and a whole family of raccoons had sniffed them out. I took a few minutes to stoke the fire up with some dry pine, took the skillet full of fish, and threw them just out of sight of the light from camp. With one loud clack, the mama called all the little ones to eat. The fire kept them too scared to come any closer, but they must have been hungry. I dozed back off in the hammock. The next morning I woke up and walked to where I had thrown the fish. They had cleaned up every fin, bone, and drop of grease and moved on with full bellies. I think I had a paranormal encounter playing a game at a sleepover. I am sharing this because I genuinely want to hear others' opinions about my creepy experience, and I feel uncertain about what to do next, so I would appreciate any advice from experts who might be present. A major part of this story is us playing a card game and weird stuff happening, and I'm going to try to avoid talking too much about the rules and such for those who are unfamiliar, but it's kind of unavoidable. I feel like I should also preface this by saying people have died in my house and on other spots of the property I live on. I live in a historical spot of Pennsylvania, like a few minutes from Gettysburg. I had a sleepover with some friends and my cousins 2 days ago, and that is when the following happened. For privacy, I'm going to use some aliases for the people involved. It was me, my sister W, my friend A, my other friend L, my sister's friend S, and my 2 cousins J and O. J and O are a lot younger than the rest of the group, so they were the least involved here, but they did experience some of it. Late at night we decided to play a couple of card games and decided on this little card game called One Night Ultimate Werewolf. I have played this game like a million times, and nothing has ever happened. In short, the premise of this game is everyone is assigned a card with a role on it, and among the roles is a werewolf card or a few, depending on who's playing, and everyone closes their eyes and listens to this audio that gives each player instructions for their role on what to do while everyone else is still pretending to be asleep. After everyone is finished doing their part, everyone opens their eyes, and we all have to figure out who the werewolf face is and vote them out, but some of the tasks make it hard to do because some roles have the ability to switch players' cards around or view other players' cards and such. There are also 3 extra cards in the middle that a single werewolf can view and pretend to be to avoid getting voted out. It's a pretty fun game, TBH, but this game is a huge part of this story. So everyone continued the game as the directions say, and it's not really that interesting for the story, so I'm just skimming over it. J and O were new to this game, and they didn't really understand it, so they weren't really engaged in the game.
So it started out normal, but then gradually cards started getting switched when they weren't supposed to be, and we all just assumed it was J and O not playing the game correctly, but it started getting weird when I, A, and L would consistently start ending up with the same cards over and over again at the end of the game.
I would end up with the Insomniac card, I would get the Seer card, and L would get the Drunk card. The Insomniac's action would just be to view her card at the end of the game to see if it was switched. The Seer can view another player's card or 2 from the middle, and the Drunk would swap his card with a random card from the middle. Us repeatedly ending up with the same cards was weird, but we were like, oh, that's a cool coincidence, except we started ending up with them when it was literally impossible in the game for that to happen to us. The order in which the narrator gives instructions goes werewolves, Seer, Robber, swaps cards with a player and takes their role, Troublemaker, switches 2 players' cards with each other, Drunk, and lastly Insomniac. The 3 roles in the center are idle. Me, A, and L would end up with the same cards even if they were in the center, which is impossible because only the Drunk can actually swap with the center, and sometimes our starting cards would end up in the center, which shouldn't be happening.
It wasn't only us, but everyone's cards would somehow end up in places they shouldn't, but I, A, and L would almost always end up with Insomniac, Seer, and Drunk each time by the end.
For example, in one incident, L actually started out with the Drunk, and when her turn came, she switched with a card in the middle, but at the end of the game when we all saw our cards, she still had the Drunk even after she switched, which should not have been possible. In one incident, I started out with a werewolf, and since I was the only werewolf, I checked a card in the middle, which was Insomniac. Cool, but when we checked cards at the end, my card was Insomniac, and my original werewolf card was in the center, where Insomniac was. Now I know what you guys are thinking. Someone was probably just messing around and switching the cards all crazy as a joke. And yeah, I know, that's what we all thought at first. We did think it was funny at first, but eventually we started getting kind of annoyed, thinking someone was intentionally playing the game wrong, and then weirded out after nobody would admit to it. And nobody here would take it this far after seeing how people are getting upset about it now. So we put the game away and did something else for a little bit.
Eventually J and O ended up falling asleep, and it was just me, A, L, S, and W awake.
We went outside at night for a bit and talked about what happened before getting scared and going inside. We went back inside, and O had woken up and got scared because we weren't there, so W went back on the couch and sat down with her until she went back to sleep. We ended up deciding to play the game again to see if J and O were messing up the game on accident or on purpose, so we got out the cards and started it up again. After we started it up again, things got so much worse. One of the cards called the Tanner went missing mid-game while S was playing as him, so we had to choose another card.
Cards continued getting moved around where they shouldn't be, and I, A, and L kept ending up with Insomniac, Seer, and Drunk.
J and O were cleared from messing the game up since they were sleeping. My sister W ended up getting freaked out and going to sleep with J and O. W was cleared too.
After W left me, A, L, and S kept playing, and we all lay down on the floor with our backs facing the cards to prove we were not moving them.
That way we could also verify our rolls when we heard each other moving on our turn. Things kept getting moved around. Then we just started showing each other our starting cards and comparing them to the end so we knew people weren't moving when it wasn't their turn. It kept happening. After we stopped playing by the rules, everything worsened. The last round we played that night, we all lay with our backs facing the cards as usual, but after S did her turn as drunk, we felt two thuds on the carpet, a loud one in the middle of us where the cards were and a soft one farther away in between A and L. It sounded like footsteps. It was loud enough to wake J and O started to cry. Initially after the thuds, we kept our eyes closed until A said, "Guys, what the duck was that?" And a large breeze followed the thuds, and I suddenly felt like it wasn't safe to have my back turned anymore and jolted up. We put the game back in the box, stacking all the cards face down, and looked for the missing Tanner card to no avail, so we just closed it and put the box into another room. We continued throughout the night scared.
The next morning, I, J, and O were telling my brother D about what happened, and J grabbed the box and opened it, wanting to play again.
Inside the box all the cards were stacked face down, but the Tanner card was on the top, face up. A and J stacked all the cards in a random order, which A put in her notes, and left the box in another room. We checked on it an hour later, and the seer card was face up on the top. We left that card on the bottom face down. Nobody entered that room in the hour we left.
We decided to play it again a few times in the daytime, excluding O, S, and D because they were too scared, and S had left early in the morning.
S was cleared from messing with the game because she wasn't even here. Needless to say, it kept happening, and I and A could have sworn there was another thud, just softer, and J freaked out and left.
We kept playing, and the same things kept happening, so I, A, and L decided to take it into a different room just to see if it would still happen.
We went to W's room, the only one with blackout curtains, and W had to leave for an appointment, and J and O went home. It was just me, A, and L. I know we probably should have stopped playing, but we were so curious. We played a bunch of times in the dark, and things kept getting mixed around as usual, with us ending up with the insomniac, seer, and drunk cards. It was so dark, and we used L's phone for the audio and a flashlight. L's phone suddenly died, and we were just sitting talking about it in the dark. It was so dark I could barely see L's face, just her silhouette, but A's face was more pronounced because she was closer. L suddenly said that she couldn't see A's face, but she could kind of see mine. She started bending forward, focusing on my face, while I still couldn't see hers, before jolting backwards and saying that it wasn't my face. A and I looked at each other and turned the lights on instantly. I asked her whose face she saw, and she said she didn't know, it just wasn't mine. I asked her what it looked like, and she said that I didn't have bangs anymore, and my face was really long. We kept turning the lights off to see if she could still see it, and she could, before she ended up jumping back repeatedly, saying that it kept getting closer, despite me not moving at all. L and A switched spots, and we turned the lights off, and A examined my face before screaming that she saw it too. I was losing my shit by now because, what the hell were they talking about? I asked them to draw it, and L did, in the dark while looking at it, before suddenly freaking out and asking if I was smiling, which I wasn't. We turned the lights on and just left. They described it as looking like the face of a man with a really long face, but they couldn't make out any of his features besides his long nose and beady eyes. I am a woman. They both said my face was clear while the others were blurry, and they couldn't make out anything. We left the room and stopped messing with the game. That was basically my experience with what I think was something paranormal. I can't explain any of the things that happened, but I just wanted to share for other people's opinions. A strange feeling and night in the forest, with aftermath and a graphic dream. So, this story begins like this. A friend and I were, over a week ago, on the 29th of December 2022, to be exact, out in town, and later that night we drove up to the forest, about a mile up the hill and away from my house. We arrived there around 9 p.m. on a very strange night. The moon was visible behind the clouds, and everything was quite dark. We were standing for around 10 minutes next to my car, in the darkness, looking into the forest, having a smoke break. Then, the forest got quieter, after somebody with a dog came by, nothing unusual. Well, until it got even more quiet, I then spotted some weird lights in the forest, probably half a mile to a mile inside, between the trees. It looked like candlelight. By the way, we hadn't had any snow by then for about a week or two. I told my friend and pointed over to the lights. They just shrugged it off and told me that it was that clear, it could be a house in the distance, But it wasn't, I knew that for a fact. There was no house, just one further up the road, not over there in that forest. I knew that forest well after all. We were looking and watching for a bit until a weird feeling hit us, like we were being watched by something. We heard leaves rattling and branches cracking. Otherwise, those lights looked like they were coming closer, I can swear. I might have heard some voice from where those lights were as well, but I'm not sure. After finishing the smoke break, we got back into the car. Since it felt way too eerie, I turned to the others and said, "No worries, we're just visiting and come in peace. I know you were out there." My friend just glared at me, like I was a madman, knowing that at least one Wendigo and some other beings roamed around in this forest. I told him the stories, by the way. Well, nothing eventful afterwards, until I went to bed that night after telling him the stories. I had a very lucid dream that I could describe as astral, for what it's worth. In the dream, I was going close to the forest, looking down where that swamp was. It was a bright afternoon in the middle of the winter, snow was almost covering everything. It looked similar to these other dreams, in which a Wendigo, which I know quite well now, visited me. Speaking of, there was one, not the one I knew, this one. This one was different, looking like a bear skeleton with a skull, a big skull that looked strange, had antlers, and had a half skeleton and rotten corpse as a body. I stared at it, it looked at me and howled at me. The sound was deafening, and I only heard you know the sound after something loud like an explosion? It was like this, with white noise and static in my vision. A moment later, I was awake. I glanced around, uttering only a few words. What the duck was this? I then turned around and went to sleep again. I fell asleep. And woke up in the same dream. Just, down there, facing this Wendigo. I was mad, just mad as hell, for letting out this screech or howl. The next thing I remember is me bolting towards it, bearing some ungodly wrath, ramming my fist into its rib cage, and tearing out its heart. Moments later, I saw him fall apart, letting out a screech, holding his bloody, ice-cold heart in my hand. The following part was more or less fuzzy, I'm not sure. Did I or didn't I? Ate his heart. I later woke up, and that was pretty much it. Thank you for taking your time to listen to all the stories. I hope you all enjoyed them. Feel free to leave a comment and say what you wish to listen to in future videos.